Hello, everyone. Hello, Comrade Eddie. Hello, Jacob. I read your article today. I hope you got my email back.
It was good.
It was a good article. I learned some things. About the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we have it set to publish with the next batch of Youth League articles. So you will be on Midwestern Marks. You did it. You made it. Congratulations. Yo, how's it going, Eli? How are you? Yo, 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 yo. It is time. Did you guys know that a study published in the National Library of Medicine, which is a branch of the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health in the United States, which is a country that doesn't really like China usually, a study was conducted and published finding that the first 30 years in China after the Communist Party took over, during China under Mao, was the fastest sustained increase in life expectancy ever documented in human history ever. So this is something that's in the academic literature in the United States. China's growth in life expectancy was the fastest ever recorded in documented global history. Yet, they expect us to believe that socialism has failed every time it's been tried. So socialism increased these people's life expectancy, the years that they are able to live on this planet, faster than any other country in human history. And this doesn't count as an achievement. Why? That don't make any sense. It don't make any sense. What's up, Cobra Commander? Good to see ya. Sup, nerds? Holy shit. Hello, comrades. Communism will win. Got that right, only true noob. Hello, Riley. How's it going? Hey, everybody. Hey, Ware Pilgrim. How are you? Willingly Nomadic. Caught you live on YouTube. Woo, you did it. Congratulations. I'm glad that we're streaming today at a time where you could make it. Try and mix it up every once in a while so we can get everybody. Do you think China will bail us out again like they did in 2008? That's actually something we're going to talk about today. I don't think so. I don't think China is going to bail the U.S. out with all the talk from the U.S. of a new Cold War, and, containing China or combating Chinese neocolonialism and imperialism, which doesn't exist. And with China now brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it's like China just continually goes against what the U.S. wants while not doing anything violent, not doing anything rash, not doing anything egregious, not doing anything to where the U.S. can point and freak out and throw a hissy fit. That's why they have to invent stuff like the spy balloon. They have to say China's sending literal balloons with surveillance equipment attached to them into our country. We need to attack them and increase hostility with them, because everything China does that the U.S. actually doesn't like is, they brokered a peace deal. They brokered diplomatic relations between the Saudis and Iran. To any rational, normal person, that sounds like a good thing. Oh, these two countries with different religious beliefs aren't going to fight each other anymore. 2 thumbs up to that, says any normal, rational person. But not the U.S., because they don't have access to Iran's resources. They can't pillage Iran's resources and use them for cheap labor. Multinationals can't. And Saudi Arabia has served as really a Western neo-colonial outpost in the Middle East, in West Asia forever. Not forever, but for years. So that is harmful to the U.S. because it gives them less hegemony in West Asia. It gives them less control of that region. The U.S. and more specifically finance capitalists, banks, and multinationals. So what would be seen as a good thing from the perspective of any rational person is made out to be a bad thing by the U.S., but that's just the point. That's the whole point of China's policy. We'll keep trading. We'll keep developing these countries. We'll just keep doing things that are inarguably good. And then the U.S. will melt down and throw a tantrum about it, as they're doing, and try and push us towards hot war with China. What about the Uyghur concentration camps? That's a myth, bruh. Don't say bruh, Simon. You don't know what you're talking about yet. I'm going to send you someone named Daniel Dumbrill. This is a man who owns a bar in Shenzhen, China, who was compelled to start making content and start talking about politics because of his experience on the ground with the Chinese government and with China and with Uyghur Muslims versus the narrative that was being told in Western media. The narrative that there was a literal genocide going on of the Uyghur people, which is largely a story cooked up from Adrian Zenz. I see people putting Adrian Zenz in the chat already. Adrian Zenz is this man connected to the U.S. State Department, essentially a political oligarch of sorts, or a representative of the finance capitalist class, who is also a religious fundamentalist who says that he is on a mission from God to destroy China. If you look at most of corporate media sources about Uyghur genocide, it's Adrian Zenz. And then if you read Adrian Zenz reports himself, he's extrapolating from numbers in ways that make no sense. The vast majority of his sources are anonymous phone calls. There's very, very little hard evidence. And China has requested that the UN and the U.S. come investigate multiple times. They said, come see, the Xinjiang region where the Uyghur Muslims are concentrated, where those populations tend to live. Come and see what we're doing. We'll show you it's not genocide. The U.S. and the UN, the U.S. has rejected that repeatedly while continuing to say, no, there is a genocide going on. Look, we have these sources, with their sources being this Christian fundamentalist guy who has no real evidence. And then we've talked about how all it takes is one source. All it takes is for Adrian Zenz and then the World Uyghur Congress, which is this U.S. State Department, U.S. finance capitalist funded non-governmental organization / think tank, with the sole goal of pushing anti-China rhetoric and with pushing this Uyghur genocide narrative. They're really like an arm of the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. But anyways, the World Uyghur Congress and then Adrian Zenz, will write these reports or these sources claiming a genocide's going on. Then mainstream media will circulate them. They'll say reports show genocide. Reports show what China's doing is terrible. And it's like blasting these small, extremely debatable and extremely poorly sourced sources, and then just blasting them over a loudspeaker, which is how the U.S. media spreads most kinds of propaganda. But like I said, check out Daniel Dumbrill and check out his friend Brian Berletic. They've completely dismantled this narrative. We've done multiple videos on Midwestern Marx dismantling this narrative. Actually, when I first got into politics, there was a big a showdown between a bunch of the political TikTokers, right? Because a bunch of them were going to meet with a U.S. congressman who was using the Uyghur genocide narrative to push for more sanctions on China and push for more sanctions on Xinjiang specifically, which is the interesting thing about that, or the hypocritical thing about that, is sanctions on Xinjiang would do nothing but hurt Uyghur Muslims. It would hurt their businesses. It would hurt their livelihood. It would prevent commerce and economic activity from getting in. So they would lose jobs and economic well-being, and which is how sanctions always work. The U.S. claims we're going to help you. We're going to bring you freedom. How do they bring you freedom? Well, they surround your country with their military. They don't let any trade in, and they starve your people. So that's what they want to do to bring the Uyghurs freedom. And you know, it was kind of crazy the way it happened on TikTok. I got to see in real time how all these, you know, progressive TikTokers just basically sucked off this this U.S. congressman calling for murderous sanctions. And, you know, a bunch of them called me not a bunch of them, but a few of them called me a genocide denier. A few of the smart ones were like, saw what I was saying, and they're like, yeah, this is odd. How are sanctions going to bring people human rights? But we don't need to relive that. I can't believe the lack of intellectual integrity of most, if not all, Western media. Yeah, that's why it's best to not even read it, or, you know, if you do read it and it's something like, you know, they're claiming something new, they're claiming like there's a genocide in China, you always got to look into how they're sourcing it, and you always have to look up some alternative sources, because there's nothing they won't lie about. Like you said, like the lack of integrity is shocking at times. It's like there's no standard for journalistic integrity. There's no standard for trying to get things right. It's just out of control. Eddie, have you talked about Honduras and their commencement of diplomatic ties with the PRC yet? Another gesture of recognition on China's sovereignty with relation to Taiwan by a nation. Interesting. No, I haven't seen that, but not surprised. Honduras forever was essentially the Colombia of Central America, which Hugo Chavez called Colombia once the Israel of Latin America, meaning just a Western neo-colonial outpost, a finance capitalist outpost that they can use to attack countries that the U.S. doesn't like in Latin America, which is how Colombia has been used forever. Same way Israel's used in the Middle East. And that has been Honduras in Central America forever. The U.S. has used Honduras to launch different regime change efforts into Nicaragua, to attack the Sandinista government. And then recently you have Xiomara Castro, a democratic socialist, winning election in Honduras. So pretty incredible change of pace there. And not surprised to see them establishing diplomatic ties with the PRC, which of course is going to be one of the main things that we talk about today. There is a channel here on YouTube, Alex from Xinjiang. I think he started his videos because he saw the Uyghur narrative and he saw the lies about the place he lives in. Yeah, there's a handful of vlog channels and just random citizens in China propping up on YouTube who just see all the bullshit. They see these YouTube channels like Serpensa. Do y'all know who Serpensa is? He's just some American guy who travels around China and just talks about how the country's evil and how they're going to collapse any second now. Him and Lao Wai, something else. And they're both just not trustworthy people in the slightest. That, you know, if people have dug into their history and they were never trustworthy people, and now they've started this YouTube channel just because they know they can get boosted by the State Department, get boosted by corporate media and the algorithm and stuff like that. But to counter all this, to counter people like Serpensa who just go around China talking about how everything's crumbling and try and make it look as shitty as possible, there are, while living there and while having the Chinese people take care of them, there are a bunch of Chinese citizens who have been doing the opposite of this, which Carlos and I reacted to one on the other day of someone showing the subway. And it's just like the difference, the insane level of difference between what like the New York subway looks like in the US in a capitalist country versus what the subway looked like in China. It was clean. There weren't homeless people. There weren't people begging for money. It just looked like a more enjoyable experience, and it looked like a place where the people are taken care of and where the infrastructure is taken care of. So I really only heard of those guys via Daniel Dumbrill's takedown of them. LOL. Yeah, same. I mean, I would always see them pop up on my YouTube when I would search stuff related to China because they get freaking boosted by the stupid YouTube algorithm. which, by the way, make sure to like, share, and comment on the stream because we'll get suppressed by that algorithm. But yeah. Sir Pence is actually South African. That's right. But he like travels in his motorcycle around China, right? Muslims are still being beat to death in the streets by mobs in places like Kashmir, and yet MFs still have the balls to redirect narratives towards China. Right. And the U.S., it just shows the hypocrisy when Modi and India are doing what the U.S. wants. The U.S. loves India. They're the best. We'll forge as close a ties with India as they want. Sometimes Modi will go against the U.S. and then they're like, oh, he better watch it. But usually they have nothing but praise for Narendra Modi and the Hindutva-esque right-wing nationalistic Indian government that, in places like Kashmir is killing people for being Muslim. But the U.S. is cool with them, not cool with China, though. It has nothing to do with economics, though. It has nothing to do with China not giving Western multinationals access to their resources. It has nothing to do with it. Trust me. The U.S. has clearly been in decline for decades. China is on the rise. I have to agree. But the question then becomes, what does that mean for U.S. citizens? All right, what does that mean for U.S. citizens? Okay, the U.S. is on the decline. What does that mean? Are we all going to die? Is the U.S. going to cease to exist? Probably not. So as we decline, the economic conditions are going to get worse and worse. That's what we're seeing in Europe, and that's what we're seeing in North America right now. As the U.S. fails in their proxy war project against Russia, and as they divert more and more and more resources that direction, and force European countries to enforce sanctions, which are self-harming to say the least, putting their people in a destitute economic situation because they're refusing to buy any energy from Russia, which they'd become dependent on. We're seeing economic conditions get worse and worse in the imperialist countries as these anti-imperialist countries continue to become stronger and form stronger ties. So economic conditions deteriorating can lead to a couple things. It can lead to socialist revolution, communist revolution, or it can just lead to increased dictatorship, increased authoritarianism by the capitalist state, increased finance capital control of our everyday lives, which is already happening, right? In 2010 with Citizens United, we had political bribery legalized. We have the Patriot Act and the National Security Agency and all these different forms of spying on American citizens. We've learned through Edward Snowden that they can hack into our cell phones and our personal electronic devices at any point without us knowing. And in fact, that they do that when it's convenient for them. And it's all in the service of capital, finance capital, imperialist monopoly capital. If you go against that, like Julian Assange, you're going to get thrown in jail. If you start getting popular doing socialist propaganda and education and organizing and outreach like Midwestern Marx, you're going to get banned 7 times from TikTok. It's just the way it is. Things will never be the same. Sorry. That's just the way it is. Usman or Leon? I got Usman. I know Usman's coaches from college, the Nebraska Kearney coaches, so I got to root for their boy. Yeah, but if other countries decouple from the U.S. and all that the U.S. has is finance, we won't have any food to eat, LOL. Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying. The conditions will deteriorate for Americans. We'll have less necessary means of subsistence. People already are seeing their access to the necessary means of subsistence be decreased, go away, as our productive economy continues to dwindle and decay. But also or I mean, yeah, as our country continues to financialize, and then, more and more countries are trading with China, and like you said, could completely decouple from the U.S. So there becomes a real question of how do Americans get their necessary goods that they need to survive. And the only answer might be socialist revolution eventually. Like, conditions might get so bad in the U.S. that we don't have food or water or shelter, things like that. And our only option is to overthrow the government and the wealthy people. That's kind of what I think the decline of the U.S. Will look like. Mm-hmm. I don't think America is declining or collapsing or anything like that. Economic collapse is built into capitalism. It's literally working exactly as they intended. True, but I mean, it's built into capitalism, but now China is moving towards socialism, right? So China is moving towards a qualitatively different system that is not subject to these constant crises, right? Like, we're going to talk about this today a little bit. During the 2008 financial crisis and the years following, China was the only country who didn't have a negative GDP. They didn't see their GDP go negative, sink below zero. They continued economic growth and continued productive growth. So from a geopolitical situation, the banks and the finance capitalists are accumulating wealth and power. The same way that they always have during economic crises, right? It always causes a move towards financialization and a concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the big banks and industrial capitalists. But from a geopolitical perspective, you then have to take socialist countries into account. You have to take into account countries who have a different economic basis than the U.S. So even though these crises in the U.S. are sucking more money from the public and pushing more money towards the rentier finance capitalist class and making them more powerful, from a global situation, China's been building their industrial base. They haven't been undergoing these consistent, devastating crises. So their country's been getting rich together. Their people have been growing together to the point where they've abolished relative poverty now, and they produce everything. They have a real industrial base, whereas the U.S. has outsourced a lot of our manufacturing and industry in favor of financialization. So it's led to the accumulation of money and wealth. But from a geopolitical perspective or from a global perspective, looking at countries' real economies, what they actually produce, the actual power that they have, China is overtaking the U.S. because of capitalism's incessant crises, which, yes, work for the banks in some ways, but from maybe a domestic situation when it comes to accumulation and concentration. But from a global perspective, those crises are hurting them. Yeah. Great comment, though, Cobra. Thank you. Do you ever see the Communist Party of the Russian Federation taking power in Russia? What would that imply for Russia and the world geopolitics? Well, thank you very much for the super chat. I'm definitely not an expert on the KPRF, but it would mean, the Communist Party, what did they get? Like second in the last elections? And they have enough power to like pressure Putin to do certain things. I think that it would be huge for global politics. It would, because then you would again have a communist bloc in the East. It would be very similar to when you had the Soviet Union and China, both communist countries, both allied with each other before the Sino-Soviet split. Because Russia's sort of moving in that direction anyways. They're the state is cracking down on the oligarchs, taking more control of more important industries, and reinvesting that in Russia, in their economy. And this is after 30 years of neoliberalism being induced upon them and throwing their people into a human rights disaster after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as their economy was pillaged by Western multinationals. So it would be a big thing, especially politically. Like economically, Russia is already, moving away from neoliberalism, which is why the U.S. is throwing such a hissy fit and putting so much effort into destabilizing Russia and trying to attack and contain Russia right now. But if they were to actually make that qualitative leap towards being, a communist government, a government aimed at constructing socialism, building a worker state rather than just a government who's nominally anti-Western, anti-US because they're being attacked by the US and because 30 years ago their economy was destroyed and pillaged with the help of the US and by the US. It would be a big deal. Yeah, so great question. Thanks for the super chat. Thanks for dragging me out of the alt-right YouTube pipeline. Wow, thank you, Turtle, for letting me know that. I had no idea that I had dragged anyone out of the alt-right pipeline, but you're welcome. That's what we try and do. That's why we try and talk to everybody, reach everybody, and not dismiss anyone just because they have wrong-headed ideas about certain things. People can always change, especially young people, right? Like, you got to get them before they get into the pipeline, before they get too far, before they're watching Richard Spencer videos. But thank you. You brought yourself out of the alt-right pipeline here, though. I was just there to lend a hand. Huge thanks for the super chat. I was into like the videos I watched when I was in like middle school and high school, speaking of the alt-right pipeline, was like the furthest I got into was like The Amazing Atheist. Do y'all know who that is? He was basically like a social democrat. He voted for Bernie, but he would criticize like feminism, third wave feminism, and a lot of different social movements that really ultimately stem from liberalism. But his critique of it wasn't from a Marxist perspective or anything. It was just he would just dunk on SJWs to get a bunch of views on YouTube. But then I would start getting recommended like Milo Yiannopoulos and, even Ben Shapiro and folks like that. And I was like, okay, when these guys talk about economics, it doesn't make any sense. Like I get, some of the stuff they're saying, but I also don't feel like these guys are super smart. And I feel like they're kind of full of shit when it comes to economics and war. Like they support war. Was always one of my biggest issues when I was like 17, 16-year-old high schooler, trying to figure out what I believed. And then I found Gavin McInnes. I was like, continuing to watch these folks and saw Gavin McInnes. I was like, okay, this guy is clearly just like not a smart person. I was like, who listens to this guy? And they're like, oh yeah, he's just spot on. Like he was just saying stuff. Like whatever sounds good, that's what Gavin McInnes was going to say at any time. And Gavin McInnes kind of bounced me out of the alt-right pipeline. I was like, all right, these guys are pretty dumb. I'm going to go see what else is out there. Kyle Kalinske would be the next big commentator I got into. But how old are you now? 25. So that would have been like 10 years ago when that all started. Because my dad was a teacher in Wisconsin. And for those who don't know, Scott Walker, the Republican Koch brothers puppet, former governor of Wisconsin, abolished the teachers unions and gave them a huge pay cut, which he said was to fix the debt. We got to be fiscally responsible by not paying our teachers. And so Wisconsin's debt is currently at like $20 billion or something. So good job fixing the debt, Scott, you fucking moron. But sorry, I hate this man so bad because he was such a liar the whole time. And when this was going on, he was demonizing the teachers. I wrote an article about this. I'll never forget going to church with my parents. And there were these people at church talking about how the teachers are all sleeping under their desks. And that's why we need to cut their salaries and get rid of their union. So they stop sleeping under their desks when they're supposed to be at work. And I had watched my dad get up at 5 a.m. and work till 9 p.m. every day my entire life. Like, what the hell are you people talking about? You're just falling into this Scott Walker and this Koch brothers funded propaganda trap that's turning because what had happened was the private sector workers, like the sort of blue collar industrial workers, had their unions cut in the 90s. So their unions got busted, their wages got worse, their conditions of life got worse. So then 10, 15, 20 years later, Scott Walker comes along and tells all the blue collar workers, tells all the private sector workers, oh, it's because of those public sector workers. It's because of the teachers. That's why your wages went down, not because we busted your unions. Let's cut the teachers' salaries and bust up their unions. And they got a lot of people on board with this, tricked a lot of people into turning against other sections of the working class. Walker and the Koch brothers expertly turned the Wisconsin working class against each other while lying and running out the back door with all the money the whole time. And we're able to bust up the unions. And now, guess what? Everybody's wages are lower. Oh, crazy. It wasn't the public sector workers' fault that the private sector workers were poor. That's wild. Who would have thought it was the capitalists all along? It was the Koch brothers who had bought off our governor all along. Holy shit. And the fact that people couldn't see this, the fact that people were being so easily duped by this is what really got me into politics in the first place. I was just mind blown I couldn't believe how stupid people could be, but it wasn't their stupidity. It was the capitalist ruling class doing a good job of turning people against each other. And, the fact that there wasn't enough people willing to stand up and tell the truth. Have you seen Bad Empanada 2's most recent video? No, I haven't even seen Bad Empanada 1's most recent video. Let alone number 2. I remember when Gavin McGinnis was promoting a new book he wrote on a music program called The Wedge, on much the equivalent of MTV in Canada over 10 years ago. He was weird as well as there. He was weird then as well. Yes, absolutely. Hadn't gone down the alt-right path at that point. No, he founded Vice, right? He was a founder of Vice News, which you think of as a liberal outlet. Everyone who isn't right-wing effing hates Scott Walker's guts. He is the worst human being who's ever lived. I'm telling y'all. People probably know this because the book Dark Money by Jane Meyer heavily focuses on Walker, because the Koch brothers, when they were developing this infrastructure for controlling elections and funneling money into colleges so that they can control the narrative about politics across the entire country, they loved Scott Walker. They would talk to each other about, Scott is just the best. He'll do whatever we say. He's an absolute puppet of us, the multimillionaire or multi-bajillionaire oil oligarchs trying to buy off the democracy, America's democracy. We love Scott Walker. He was their favorite. Like, when you watch that guy talk, it's just an empty husk. Not a single ounce of integrity, not a single ounce of principle, not a single ounce of intelligence. He's nothing but an empty husk, an empty vessel for the Koch brothers to take over. I mean, I truly cannot stand that man. Truly. This is what Scott Walker is doing now, making a bunch of money speaking. Good must overcome evil. Scott Walker live at the March High School Conference. Good must overcome evil, says Scott Walker. Okay, Scott. Remember when you promised to fix the debt by cutting the teachers' salaries, and then you cut their salaries and the debt was still $20 billion? And then you gave a $4 billion subsidy to Foxconn. You took the working class taxpayers who paid your salary and you gave their money to your corporate donors who also paid your salary. Now you're going to tell us about how good must overcome evil? Good must overcome evil, and they must throw your ass out of office. Bring back the gulags for Scott Walker. Effing moron, Eddie. Yes, that is what Scott Walker is. A moron and a shill for the Koch brothers. Oh, third super chat already. Killing it tonight. Thank you, everyone. Love you, Eddie. What's your opinion on Christian-based religions using tithing? Also, I think you should check out TFP Student Action. Okay, what's TFP Student Action? Let me check it out right now. Oops, I looked them up on Reddit. But tradition, family, property. Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll have to look into that at some point. And they have a thing about socialism. May God protect America from socialism. All right, TFP student action sounds horrible. Interesting. Anyways, got a little distracted there. What's your opinion on Christian-based religions using tithing? Isn't tithing where you have to pay a certain amount of your income to the church? I mean, it's really a leftover from feudalism. Like in feudalism, you would produce what you needed to survive, and then you would pay tithes to either the king or the church, whoever you worked under. So that's the church repurposing that idea under capitalism to say part of your wage, part of the money that you're actually paid for your labor, even though a large amount of the money that or value that your labor creates is appropriated, taken from you. Take the wage that you do get and give it to the church, this institution that really is going to serve to enforce capitalist ideology. I mean, churches can be a source of community. They can be a source of resistance. I totally believe in, using religion or liberation theology to organize people and all that. But, ultimately the church does spread ideology which reinforces the dominant relations of production, which are the capitalist relations of production in this system. And, them asking you for a small fraction of your wage is a way to do that. Personally, I would say just give your wage somewhere else. Churches already don't have to pay taxes. Like most of them are doing all right. Put your wages towards a communist or socialist organization, towards super chats for Midwestern Marks. Just kidding. That sounds sacrilegious. I'm telling you all to pay my website instead of give money to your church. But whatever, it is what it is. Yeah, I mean, if your church is doing good work, like charitable work, and, you're really religious and connected to your community and you're into the church like that, I wouldn't fault anyone for doing tithes, but it does just seem like a leftover rule from feudalism that the churches in modern day are repurposing and using to get more money out of their congregations. But yeah, thank you very much for the super chat and the question. It's an unenforced 10%. Yeah. I mean, my parents used to do it. That's how religious the family I grew up in was. I've been to churches that taught liberation theology. They weren't doing well money-wise. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, if you want to tithe to those churches, go for it. Maybe we should all rob banks to fund the revolution by Stalin. Exactly. That's what we all need to do. Just kidding. For legal purposes, do not rob a bank because I told you to. Do it because you want to. Just kidding. Don't rob a bank at all. For legal purposes, I do not condone robbing banks. Only GTA and online and in Minecraft should we rob banks. Yes, do it in Minecraft. Geez, by the way, this TFP student action website or organization looks like they're really something. Socialism, sodomy, and Satanism. What? How do those things even go together at all? Hail Satan, screamed the self-proclaimed socialist, who also muttered pro-transgender propaganda. What the hell? What happens when you unmask socialism?
I was literally right in that building, and then I looked over here, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's TFP!
You're a socialist?
Yes!
You are?
Hail Satan! Hail Satan! Hail Satan! You're pro-communism? What?
Okay, this guy's got to be a government plant. The government definitely planted this guy. And they're like, go to this TFP rally and give them some content.
You're not going to change their minds.
I'm not. I'm just kind of here to... I don't know, actually. I figured y'all didn't get a reservation or nothing.
Why don't we take the poles down, we'll walk with you over to your car, and we'll show you exactly where the space is to actually set up shop at.
Okay, that's enough of those guys. Illinois gets 1 week minimum mandatory paid leave. Is that a new thing? Voosh socialism. Yes. The far right is sophisticated like that, right? Not totally related, but I watched Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang after hearing about it from you. Awesome. Fantastic documentary. Neocons are wackos. Absolutely. Thank you, the Day B, for the $5. And thanks for watching that that movie I recommended. It really is great, isn't it? I'm a huge fan of Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang. I think it's like the quintessential source, like I said, for learning about the defector industry, learning about North Korea, and I mean, more so learning about the narratives that were fed in the West about North Korea. Because North Korea can be one of like the hardest hurdling blocks for people. We are so propagandized about that country. People, and it's always the weaponization of compassion, right? It's always, why don't you care about the North Koreans? Look how terrible their situation is. Realize that your situation isn't that bad, American, and just feel bad for the North Korean people because they're oppressed by their leader, and support the sanctions that we're putting on them, support our regime change efforts against North Korea. They're just essentially a comic book villain of a country. It's just wacky, but it's hard for people, you know, when you talk about the DPRK like it's a normal country, or you say you support the DPRK or support their sovereignty, people are like, what North Korea? They can't understand how much they've been lied to about this country, you know. And then you start asking people questions about the DPRK, and they start to think, it's like, wow, I assumed this country was evil. I assumed this country was, you know, under the iron fist of Kim Jong-un, but all I really know about them comes from the Netflix movie The Interview. All I know about them comes from James Franco and Seth Rogen, or whatever I saw, you know, in passing on the internet. I don't actually know anything about this country or how it actually operates. And, but it can be hard for people to get over that hurdle and realize that North Korea is just another country. It's another country trying to have their own unique economic system and build socialism that the U.S. is trying to destroy for doing that. So, yeah, Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang really helps you understand how bad the lies are. When you see two literal North Korean defectors and a lawyer who represents defectors being like, this is BS, we were tricked into leaving. These are all the things the U.S. has done to destroy Korea, and this propaganda is just part of their efforts to do that. Never seen Vice's documentary about the DPRK? No, but I'm sure I don't want to. I'm sure it's bad, unless it's actually good. Maybe not. Who knows?
Warning.
The first world left will never matter again. That's Bad Empanada 2's new video. Sounds like third worldism. Sounds like ultra. Being an ultra. Should we watch it? I'll watch it. People always want me to react to Bad Empanada. I'll watch it for like a few minutes.
Advice would I give to a leftist in the first world to organize in their countries? Go to the third world and organize there instead. You're not going to build shit in the first world. People there are too materially invested in maintaining their comparative advantage with the third world, so it's not going to happen. I would hope the last like 10 years, especially of American politics and UK politics, etc., would have made that very obvious to anyone. When you come to the third world, you also need to like let the people who live there just blatantly exploit you. Like when a taxi driver charges you double, you can't say anything. That's the rule. I mean, you can't build a left in these countries where the very notion of building a left doesn't work, because people who pretend to be leftists tell you that building a left shouldn't happen because there's always like this ever-present threat of like liberals versus conservatives. So you can never build anything better than the liberals. You have to always vote for the liberals. You know, building anything aside, you know, building an alternative movement, according to them, is like sacrilege. When you live in that environment where you're not allowed to build anything better, you can't build anything better. Like you're just one person. How the fuck are you going to shout down like a bunch of federal government funded people? You try to funnel like any radical sentiment into the centrist wing of the Democratic Party. You saw this with the recent election. Everyone saw it. What happened? All these people who said they're just reluctantly voting for Biden, like I think it's, oh yeah, you should have voted for Biden, obviously. But it turned out they weren't actually reluctantly voting for him. They were just using that as a rhetorical tool to get others to vote for him, because once he was in power, now they're ignoring everything that he's doing.
This has always been a thing. This has always been a thing. People just don't study pre-revolutionary Russia. And they don't understand that 10 years before the revolution, everybody was saying that revolution was impossible, or, it's going to be a long time, including Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky and everyone who participated in the revolution. They're like, we got to play the long game. And also, Russia was an imperialist nation. What happened was the army mutinied. The army, for the most part, sided with the socialists and the communists because they were tired of being sent to fight and die in these expansionist wars, which, he says that people in the imperial core are dependent on the exploitation of the global south. Like, that's always been a thing. That's always been what Lenin calls opportunism within capitalist imperialism. There's always been people who say, and back then more people would explicitly argue this, like, no, we should support imperialism and warfare because it's going to make the standard of life for our workers a little bit better than the countries who were imperializing. So that's always been a thing, and that imperialist opportunism has always been something that socialists need to fight against. Like, Lenin wrote about this extensively, educating the workers on imperialism so that they don't fall into opportunism, supporting or national chauvinism, supporting their country in the great imperialist war, World War I, instead saying there should be no war. And that was how they got the army to mutiny. That's how they got the army to join socialism. Heaven for, like, could we please try something similar to that in the U.S. instead of just saying F the troops all day long? And I mean, I know that the troops have done a lot of terrible stuff, but that's the U.S. military, the finance capitalist imperialists, sending our working people to go fight and die in their wars. So if we start developing strategies that actually make sense for our material conditions, that actually make sense for being an imperialist country, we might have a revolution like the imperialist nation Russia did, where nobody thought it was possible, where they didn't even have fully developed capitalism yet. And then, I mean, the idea that we have to stop supporting bourgeois parties, yeah, but what makes you think that everybody's just going to support bourgeois parties forever and ever and ever? With every failure of the Bernie administration or Bernie campaign or something like that, some electoral effort that attempts to work through the Democratic Party, more and more people realize how futile those efforts are, right? More and more people become like us. And yeah, there were a lot of people who didn't learn their lesson, who were essentially just Democrats the whole time. But there's a lot of Marxists I know who predicted that when we were working in the Bernie campaign. I didn't even know what they were talking about, but they were saying, yes, most of our bosses here, I was an intern for Bernie. He said most of our bosses, most of our staffers are in a year or two are going to be Democratic Party administrators, Democratic Party higher ups, or they're going to work for some Democratic Party campaign. They're going to sell out their values. They're only here with Bernie because they're young and Bernie's popular, but ultimately they're careerists who want to climb the ladder. They were 100% right. That's what's happened, but that was predictable. Right, that was predictable. Opportunism is always, always, always one of the main things that makes socialist organizing difficult, because you need leadership of someone like Vladimir Lenin. You need people who are smart, people who are intelligent, and people who are willing to strategize and act, who aren't going to sell out. And that temptation to sell out to the ruling capitalist class is always, always, always going to be there. And that's what happened to a lot of Bernie people. But there are a lot of people who didn't sell out. There are a lot of people who are still in the working class. And there are a lot of people who didn't have the opportunity to sell out, who were desperate for the Bernie campaign to bring them healthcare and the things they need to survive. And it didn't. And those people are still desperate. Those people are still yearning for a revolutionary movement. But, as long as we keep pushing these narratives like, oh, revolution's impossible, revolution can only happen in the global south and anti-imperialist countries, even though the Russian Revolution happened in an imperialist country, and Lenin wrote about it extensively. It's impossible for us. It's just too hard for us. It's too hard. Didn't you see how many communists voted Democrats? Let's not convince them to vote communist. It's just too hard. Let's not convince the workers that the Democratic Party isn't worth their time and build something else. It's just too hard. Let's just give up. It's not going to happen if you talk like that. No. If you make these criticisms and then offer solutions and alternatives and act upon them the same way Lenin and the Bolsheviks did, then we can have a revolution. The objective conditions are there. Thoughts on Caleb Maupin's political analysis? Much love from me, or from Minnesota, right? Minnesota? Viva Russia. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you very much. I think Caleb Maupin has a lot of good historical analysis. He has a lot of good political analysis. I used to watch his show a lot for Marxist-Leninist analysis. He's got a good grasp on Marxism. You can tell he's read a lot of theory. I like his analysis of Malthusianism and how it's different from Marxism. I think he's got good critiques of liberalism and even wokeism to certain extents. He does have good critiques of wokeism. He has his analysis of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, I thought was really important and really good. But yeah, obviously as the leader of an organization, I think there's some issues there. I'm not sure if he should be leading a party or organization, which we don't have to get into that, but that's how I honestly feel. I'm going to tell you what I think and be honest, but thank you very much, Caleb. I've also written a review of Caleb Maupin's book about BreadTube, because I thought that was really good, actually. And it was funny how BreadTube was freaking out, like, oh, what an idiot. He wrote a book about us. He wrote a book, cope. They just used their internet slang. And it's like, what? I mean, socialists have been writing books about each other forever. Right? What if Marx wrote The Poverty of Philosophy about, who was that? Proudhon or someone's philosophy of poverty. And Proudhon just responded by being like, cope. You wrote a book about me, idiot. Like, so stupid. But that's BreadTube. Thank you for your honesty about a sensitive topic. I try. I'm always a little nervous, but I do my best. Thank you. Caleb eats babies. LMAO, you're comparing. It doesn't make any sense. I just read a really stupid comment. Disrespect is when we don't read or publish their silly letters. Yes, own Trotsky. Owned. All righty then. Let's jump into our analysis of Taiwan. So our buddy Danny Haifong, Spirit of Ho on Twitter, as in Ho Chi Minh, made this really interesting tweet. I'm sure he got a lot of backlash for this tweet, or maybe not. Maybe this tweet didn't make it to the wrong people, make it to the reactionaries. But he said, Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is part of China. Don't take my word for it. Read the 3 U.S. joint communiques with China, or the U.S. China joint communiques, the UN Resolution 2758, and the Constitution of the Republic of China established by the KMT on Taiwan, the Kuomintang. So when I saw this, I was quite interested. Obviously, I agree with what Danny said, but I had never read these 3 pieces of information. And I thought it would be really valuable to know what the basis of Taiwan-China relations are, what the U.S. has said about them in the past, what the UN has said about them in the past, and what the Kuomintang has said about them in the past, or what the Taiwanese have said about it in the past. So I went ahead and read all 3 of these pieces of information, so you don't have to. And now we will discuss them. So, yeah. So the first one that I want to talk about is the U.S. China joint communiques. So these were a series of communications between U.S. and China that established diplomatic relations between the countries during China's reform and opening up period, when they were opening up to more private markets. But it also focuses on Taiwan specifically, and lays the foundation for U.S.-China relations in relationship to Taiwan. So in the first communique, the first of the three, which was in 1972, I believe, here it is. Here's all three of them compiled together for us. The U.S. formally acknowledged that all of China on both sides of the Taiwan Strait is one China, right? So the U.S. themselves say that there is one China. It includes mainland China and it includes Taiwan. Taiwan has been a part of China forever. The Taiwanese people see themselves as being part of China. The mainland and the people across the way across the Taiwan Strait both see themselves as being part of the same country. The U.S. is going to recognize this formally and legally. That's what the first communique did. The second one recognized the PRC, the People's Republic of China, as the sole government of China. So not the ROC. Not the nationalist government or the nationalist political group, but only the People's Republic, which includes mainland China and Taiwan. So the U.S. at this time promised to end all formal relations with the ROC in Taiwan while maintaining economic and cultural ties. So they said, we're no longer going to recognize Taiwan as if it's its own independent country, its own independent government, separate from the PRC, separate from the mainland, run by the ROC. But instead, we see it as being part of the PRC. We see them being the same as China, and we won't sanction them or stop trading with them or stop engaging in economic activity with them. We will continue to engage in economic activity with Taiwan while recognizing that Taiwan is part of China. And at this time, with China's reform and opening up, the U.S. was creating stronger economic ties with China in general. So it made sense that they would make this political agreement while continuing economic and cultural ties to Taiwan. So basically agreeing that Taiwan is part of China and agreeing that they wouldn't attack Taiwan or engage in economic warfare against Taiwan. So the third communique came later in 1982, and this confirmed the first two, but the U.S. also said at this point they will continue to sell arms to Taiwan in proportion to China's militarization of Taiwan. So as China moves towards reunification, the U.S. will increase arms sales to Taiwan, although we agree that Taiwan is part of China. So you can already see the hypocrisy in U.S. policy. And the third communique came with 6 assurances, which were granted to the U.S. by Taiwan and were proposed by the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, who previously ruled China and who fought against the communists in the Chinese Civil War, and then fled to Taiwan after the Civil War, which is why this situation is the way it is. And the 6 assurances said that the U.S. would not play a mediating role between the mainland and Taiwan, and that the U.S. would allow Chinese people to do this. So, Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan, there were a lot of Taiwanese people and, people who don't support communism in China, who were very mad at Nancy Pelosi because this is the U.S. going back on what they said with the 6 assurances and trying to mediate the deal between Taiwan and China in a way that's beneficial to them. The U.S. even recently threatened to blow up Taiwan's semiconductor facilities, which goes back on their promise to not exert any pressure on Taiwan, which was also part of the 6 assurances. So not only is the U.S. screwing over China and lying to China and going back on their promises to the PRC, but the people of Taiwan as well, right? The people of Taiwan don't want this. The people of Taiwan see the people in mainland China as their brothers and sisters, as their countrymen. They see it as all one country, and the U.S. is trying to support separatism and just use Taiwan as an outpost, as a way to attack mainland China the same way they're using Ukraine to attack Russia right now. So yeah, that's the 3 communiques. Very interesting to read. You see that they lay the basis for for relations between China and Taiwan, which the U.S. is supposed to respect and which they have not. And if you read the actual communiques, I just kind of gave a summary, but there are also some interesting aspects in it that I didn't mention yet, like China pressuring the U.S. to relax aggression, not only against themselves, but against their allies as well. So the U.S. China talks about the reunification of Korea. They try and get the U.S. to leave Pakistan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, all these different countries alone. And they say that the U.S. is not respecting territorial sovereignty when they do things like drop tons and tons of Agent Orange and napalm on Vietnam. So even though China is forging closer economic and political relations with the U.S. at this point, they're still, pressuring the U.S. to stop with their imperialist, murderous aggression around the world. It's also very interesting. They say, and this is a direct quote from the communiques, China says, China will never be a superpower and it opposes hegemony and power politics of any kind. The Chinese side stated that it firmly supports the struggles of all the oppressed people and nations for freedom and liberation, and that the people of all countries have the right to choose their social systems according to their own wishes and the right to safeguard the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of their own countries, and oppose foreign aggression, interference, control, and subversion. All foreign troops should be withdrawn to their own countries. So that was, China straight up said that to the U.S. We support oppressed groups, including the oppressed groups that are being oppressed by you. And we support all movements for liberation and national self-determination, which at the time, the colonial world, formerly colonial world, was becoming the anti-colonial world. And all these countries in Africa or Latin America were rising up and demanding their sovereignty, demanding that these Western colonial occupiers GTFO. And that was followed by a lot of them supporting socialism. But you have China and the Soviet Union who supported this every step of the way. Stalin wrote Marxism and the National Question, which laid out their position on these national liberation movements. And they said, even if these countries aren't socialist, if they aren't communist, even if they don't have our same political and economic system, we will support their struggle for sovereignty because we believe in the right of a nation of people to determine their own future, to determine their own system. So China is confirming that in the communique and confirming that directly to the U.S., saying we will not stop supporting liberation movements and the movements of oppressed groups. The U.S. gave a bunch of lip service to sovereignty in their communique, but obviously, one of the communiques on their side was written by Ronald Reagan, who funded the Contras by facilitating the sale of crack cocaine in primarily black neighborhoods in the U.S. in order to fund their right-wing extremist paramilitary death squads, their fascistic death squads in Nicaragua that killed thousands of thousands of Sandinista liberation fighters. So the U.S. didn't really follow through on their lip service to protect sovereignty. Yeah. So the next piece of legislation, I guess, that Danny Haifong talks about is the UN Resolution 2758. So this is the restoration, The restoration of the lawful rights of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations. This one's really short. It's just a small little, I got to translate it to English here real quick. Just a small little resolution that, again, happened in 1971, right as China was going through their reform and opening up period, allowing for a few more markets and more economic activity, more interaction with the West. And if you want to learn about the market reform period specifically and what prompted all these political changes and these political moves, check out our video on the construction of modern China, Midwestern Marx. That'll talk about the reform and opening up period, what it did, why China was forging closer relations with the U.S., how they're not socialist, even though they opened themselves up to a few more markets, and all that. And it'll really give you an idea of the economic developments that were driving these political developments. So anyways, here's what the resolution says. It says, the General Assembly, recalling the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, considering that the restoration of the lawful rights of the People's Republic of China is essential, both for the protection of the Charter of the United Nations and for the cause that the United Nations must serve under the Charter. Recognizing that the representatives of the government of the People's Republic of China are the only lawful representatives to China, to the United Nations, and that the People's Republic of China is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So saying that because China is a member of the United Nations Charter and China is actually a member of the 5-country Security Council that involves China, the Soviet Union at the time, now Russia, the U.S., U.K., and France, they will now recognize the PRC and not this ROC government that fled to Taiwan after the Chinese Civil War. So it says, the Security Council decides to restore all its rights to the People's Republic of China and recognize the representatives of its government as the only legitimate representative of China to the United Nations, and to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place where they unlawfully occupy at the United Nations and in all the organizations related to it. So we only recognize the PRC at the United Nations, and we no longer recognize this unlawful government. There is one China. It includes Taiwan and the mainland. So when the U.S. does all this stuff talking about how Taiwan should be independent, or when Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan to inflame tensions with China, they're completely going against international law and the agreements that they made. And this is why nobody in the world trusts the United States, right? I always say, think of geopolitical situations like an interpersonal situation, right? If you knew someone who kept making agreements with you, kept promising to do something and putting it down in writing, and then whenever it was convenient for them, they just changed their mind and said no, and then moved to attacking you and started doing the opposite of what they said and trying to destabilize your country, right? It's not your country, and trying to hurt you and lying about it to everyone else who calls them out about it, you wouldn't trust them anymore. This is why the world is starting to move away from trusting the U.S., because every time the U.S. makes some agreement, says they're not going to do something, they go back on it. They promised they wouldn't expand NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They did. They promised to respect country sovereignty. They absolutely didn't. They promised to respect the one China policy and see the PRC as the only legitimate government in China. They didn't. They did for a while. Then it wasn't convenient for them economically. Now they're not. So these guys are just blatant liars. They're just blatant liars. Like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and all these people talking about the sovereignty of Taiwan and how we need to support Taiwanese independence. The Taiwanese people see themselves as being part of the mainland, right? And a lot of them recognize that you're trying to use them as puppets. You're trying to use them as tools to attack mainland China and to attack the PRC. And they want to do reunification or not reunification their own way. They want to make their own decisions. But the U.S. can't have that. And what's so gross is the U.S. always tries to pretend like we're the good guys. We're helping them. And then if you don't think Taiwan is its own independent country, if you agree with the vast majority of Taiwanese people, instead of agreeing with the U.S. State Department, you're treated like you're evil. You're a dick. Oh, what, don't you care about the people of Taiwan? Don't you care about the people of Taiwan and their independence? I do care about the people of Taiwan, right? So I'm going to respect what they want. I'm going to respect what the people of China have agreed upon and what we have agreed upon with them in writing, legally, at the freaking UN. You disgusting liars. So it's frustrating to have a group of lying, deceiving, ultra wealthy elites at the head of your country. And then Nancy Pelosi acts like she's a hero, acts like she's a girl boss for going to Taiwan and pushing us closer to World War III. So it's the weaponization of compassion again that they always use. And then they pretend like they're the good guys. So the last little piece of information that Danny talked about here in his tweet was the Constitution of the Republic of China in Taiwan. So this is the ROC Constitution adopted in December 1946 by the nationalists who were opposed to the communists. And this constitution was actually decided upon before the Communist Party took power. So when the Civil War was still ongoing, when the nationalist government was in power of China, they wrote a constitution saying that Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan is part of the mainland, right? The main purpose of this constitution was to establish sovereignty, to establish borders for China. And again, this was before the communists were in power. And it was established that Taiwan was part of China. So China did not invent this idea that Taiwan is part of China. It's not the communists trying to seize Taiwan. The communists inherited the claim to Taiwan from the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang and the nationalists were in charge of China. They created a constitution saying Taiwan is part of China, and then the communists came to control China. And then the communists said, we're going to stick with this constitution in terms of sovereignty because that's what the people want, because Taiwan has been part of China for like 1,000 years. So this narrative that it was the communists who seized Taiwan from its rightful owners is absurd. And the ROC, the Kuomintang nationalists who then fled to Taiwan after the Civil War, still see themselves as part of the mainland. Right, the Kuomintang don't like the U.S.-backed separatists who think that Taiwan should be its own country, separate from China, which makes up a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the country. So, as I said, this lays the basis for representation in the governmental system in Taiwan. It's changed a lot since the 40s and especially since the 80s and 90s, because obviously the situation has changed. So, at one point, the U.S. puppets arguing for Taiwanese independence, who are essentially just separatists, separatist extremists in Taiwan, who are only really exist because of U.S. funding and U.S. support. And many of the hashtag Free Taiwan people exist outside of Taiwan, outside of China. They live in the U.S. or wherever. There's not a lot of people who think that in Taiwan itself, but the political party that does represent Taiwanese independence, Taiwan splitting from China, tried to repeal this constitution. They tried to repeal the constitution in the early 2000s or the 90s. I can't remember exactly when, but it was blocked by the Kuomintang. It was blocked by the nationalists, the people who fought against China with U.S. backing in the Chinese Civil War, because the Kuomintang see themselves as being part of China. Right. So this is what I mean. There are these political parties, especially in Taiwan, where they have a multi-party system that don't like the Chinese communists, that don't agree with communism, don't agree with the PRC fully, even though they may see themselves as, technically part of the PRC. But they still see themselves as part of China. They still see Taiwan as being within the borders of China because it's been like that forever. And their people want to maintain national sovereignty. So when these U.S.-backed separatists tried to get rid of the constitution that's been enacted forever, the Kuomintang were like, no, get the hell out of here. Yet the U.S. claims that's what the people in Taiwan want. Right? That's what they all want is separatism. No, the Taiwanese separatists are the U.S. That's the only Taiwanese separatists, them and their lackeys, people getting directly funded by U.S.-backed NGOs. So there were a handful of revisions that were made to this over the years. Essentially what these revisions did was, here's 1st through 7th. They brought Taiwan and China closer together. Like the first revision saw Taiwan adopt aspects of the Chinese constitution, made Taiwanese citizens subject to PRC laws, which was the precondition that had been laid to national unification, was having the same constitution and laws. It brought Taiwanese citizens into the National Assembly eventually, made Taiwan subject to the executive office of China, the Yuan, and established a semi-presidential system, which is why Taiwan still has their own president today. It's not like a real president. It's like a semi-executive office that was established as sort of a transition. Because because the ultimate goal for China is reunification, right? Bringing Taiwan into the PRC fully and bringing them into the socialist economy. There isn't, majority support for that yet, but by meeting the Taiwanese people's needs and ensuring economic development for them and slowly bringing them into the mainland, that was the plan for reunification. It wasn't planned to happen for years and years and years and years. Now, with the U.S. meddling and with the U.S. militarization of Taiwan and trying to inflame hostilities between Taiwan and China, that plan for reunification might look different, right? China might not be able to just continue slowly bringing Taiwan in while developing them economically until the point where the countries can reunify. The U.S. is going to do everything they can to break that up, which is why you have U.S. officials openly saying now that they want to blow up Taiwan semiconductor factories, which that'll help the people of Taiwan blow up their jobs, blow up their infrastructure, blow up their factories. The U.S. is so benevolent and kind. But anyways, some of the most interesting parts of the revisions to the Constitution that came in the 90s and early 2000s was they ensured economic development for the people of Taiwan, right? So there were the legal and political developments that brought Taiwan and the mainland closer together, but they also determined that the state has to promote the development of industry and the economic well-being for the people, which were the goals and the founding principles of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party. We're going to meet the needs of the people, so they support us, right? They were moving towards meeting the needs of the people in Taiwan. They made it mandatory for the government to finance small and medium enterprises there, fund social relief and assistance programs, provide employment for the citizens, protect their indigenous communities, ensure the livelihood of retired military members. These were some of the guarantees that were enacted by the PRC to try and bring Taiwan into the Chinese socialist economic system. So there's the terrorizing of Taiwan, the authoritarianism of socialism and communism, right? The communists made sure that the Taiwanese people's economic needs were met. Oh no, those bastards! How could they? How could they meet the people's needs? Surely Taiwan will want to go to war with China soon because it's convenient for the U.S. So the 7th revision to the Constitution said that China's existing borders and territories cannot be changed unless voted on by a majority of Chinese legislative bodies. And I don't know when that 7th revision was, 2004, right? So in 2004, Taiwan and China are saying our borders will not change. Taiwan is part of China, period. That's what's been agreed upon. That's what we've decided. We're not going to change that. But the U.S., of course, giving their own narrative, claiming Taiwan is its own country and everyone there wants to be their own country, and China's authoritarian for trying to hold on to Taiwan. Eventually, with that 7th revision, the Taiwan's National Assembly was abolished and the powers were transferred to the people, and their people were given more direct say in who their representatives are in the PRC. So, main points. These documents that Danny Haifong shared are what established the relationships or the relations between China and Taiwan. The U.S. agreed to the one China, two systems policy, right? There's going to be two economic systems here. Taiwan gets the right to choose their own economic system, but they're still part of China, right? They're still the same country. The U.S. agreed to that legally, and now they're going against it, changing their mind because it's convenient. Another main point, the vast majority of Taiwanese people see themselves as being part of China. Another point, the reunification process has continued gradually, and it wasn't planned to be finished for years and years and years. Slowly, Taiwan was being brought into the political and legal system of the mainland, and their economic needs were being met by the socialist economy. The U.S. agreed not to mediate relations between Taiwan and China, and yet we have Nancy Pelosi running around Taiwan, pretending like she's the savior of Taiwan, bringing them freedom, as if she's not there, essentially illegally, as if she doesn't know that she's not wanted there because the U.S. agreed to leave their people alone, and yet she won't because she can't help but meddle in other countries and provoke hostilities with other countries. So the U.S. going back on their promises as always. And yeah, the last point that I have about these documents is Nancy Pelosi can suck it. I literally have that written down in my notes. So you see here, now that you know a little bit about the history of Taiwan, and maybe you didn't before, Nancy Pelosi Taiwan visit. Pelosi leaves Taiwan, but tensions rise in her wake. Like, no shit. No shit. It's almost like you guys agreed at the United Nations. It's almost like you agreed in written laws that you wouldn't try to mediate the relations between China and Taiwan, and you agreed to allow them to be one country. You agreed that Taiwan was part of China. Yet you had Nancy Pelosi, one of the most powerful insider traders and financial oligarchs in the United States, go to Taiwan and inflame hostilities, inflame tensions. Oh, tensions rose in her wake. That's crazy. I thought she was going to bring peace. I'm so used to the U.S. bringing other countries peace. Of course it raised tensions. You just blatantly lied to these people and then threatened them. And that's the U.S. arrogance and ignorance, right? So normal people, regular people, especially Americans, because we're kept in the dark about all this, don't know about those agreements, don't know about those laws, don't know about that constitution. People in China do, right? Because they see it on the news. And, the U.S. would claim it's all propaganda, but all China has to do is show their people the truth, show their people what the U.S. agreed to. So Chinese people are aware that the U.S. has agreed to respect their sovereignty and that Taiwan is part of China. But then when the U.S. starts trying to inflame hostility and Nancy Pelosi is doing her thing, the U.S. is lying about it. They're lying about, no, China seized Taiwan. China seized Taiwan. It wasn't the nationalist government who said Taiwan's part of China, which is a claim that the PRC inherited. That's not the case, even though that's the reality. China seized them. Everyone in Taiwan wants independence. No, they don't. That's a lie too. Right? So it's not only these arrogant, belligerent actions by the finance capitalists and by the financial oligarchs like Pelosi, but it's the lies that are used to justify it. Right? The claiming that China's a liar. All China has to do is bring out the documents that the U.S. signed and agreed to, and you can see that the U.S. is lying and inflaming hostility. But then the U.S. claims, no, China's lying. Right? China's lying so they can oppress the people of Taiwan. Don't you care about the people of Taiwan? Support us. Support us in our effort to freaking destroy the whole of China. So absolutely absurd. And it's very similar, and some of you are probably realizing this already, very similar situation to Ukraine, Taiwan is. And it's going to be the U.S.'s launching point, or, where the U.S. tries to hit China. The same way that they did a coup in Ukraine and spent so much money controlling Ukrainian politics, so much money building up a pro-NATO, pro-US military force in Ukraine. Angela Merkel straight up admitted that the 2014 Minsk agreements, which were never signed, were ultimately just a way to buy time so that NATO could build up forces in Ukraine and eventually attack Russia. But they're going to try and do very, very similar things in Taiwan. But it's a different situation too. Ukraine was granted independence at one point, and it wasn't two systems, one country. It was two countries, one system under the Soviet Union. They both had a socialist economic system, but Ukraine was granted national sovereignty, and the U.S. was able to foster this separatist Ukrainian nationalist ideology since before World War II. This Stepan Bandera anti-Russian ideology, Ukrainian nationalist ideology, that's been very useful for them to this day. And they were able to bring those Ukrainian nationalists to power of the government with the 2014 Maidan coup. That's what they're trying to do in Taiwan. But like we mentioned, not that many people support separatism. Even the Kuomintang, who were the U.S.-backed forces in the Chinese Civil War, were are against, separatism. They still see themselves as being the same country as the mainlanders. So the U.S. hasn't been as successful in supporting separatism as they have been in Ukraine, but it'll be interesting to see how they try and change that, right? See how they try and inflame hostilities and use Taiwan as a puppet, right? By bringing these Ukrainian nationalists, these anti-Russian nationalists to power in Ukraine, they've been able to very easily been able to use them as puppets against Russia, because these people, these neo-Nazis who U.S. NGOs have been backing and arming and supporting forever in Ukraine since like the 90s, already hate the Russian people. They already want to make Russian speaking illegal. They already wanted to make Stepan Bandera a national hero. So they immediately started attacking the Russian speakers in the Donbass and East Ukraine as soon as they came to power and as soon as these neo-Nazi elements were filtered into the government. Right? I don't think there's such a political party or such a nationalistic type group with that kind of power in in Taiwan. I just don't see it. Most of the anti-China political groups in Taiwan, they do exist. Most of them are like not in support of military action against China. That's like under 10% support in Taiwan, and that's a survey conducted by the White House. But there's just not that many people who want military action against China. They know they would lose. They know, and more importantly, they know their economy is dependent on China, right? Which is why those resolutions we just covered are so important, where China said you need to provide employment, you need to take care of the livelihood of people. If Taiwan is going to be part of China, we need to have social programs that ensure their well-being. All right, this has always been the core of Chinese socialism, Chinese communism. Serve the needs of the people if you want the people to support you, right? That was the number one goal of the communists after they took power at the end of the Civil War. How do we meet the people's needs? How do we meet the people's needs? How do we meet the people's needs to consolidate their support, to get support from them? So by meeting the needs of the Taiwanese people and building up their economy, the people of Taiwan understand that their economy would be screwed if it wasn't connected to China at all. And they're less likely to go along with these U.S. Regime change efforts, unlike the Ukrainian goofy-ass neo-Nazis who were tricked into power by the U.S., tricked into fighting this horrible proxy war against Russia by the U.S., or being pushed by NATO to their death, pushed by NATO at gunpoint to their death at the hands of the Russian military. I don't think people in Taiwan will be so foolish, but time will tell. Russia is helping Ukraine regain their sovereignty by denazifying and disarming NATO. I mean, literally, look at study the Maidan coup. Read Ivan Kachinovsky's work. If you don't want to watch Ukraine on Fire by Oliver Stone, read the work of Ivan Kachinovsky, the peer-reviewed academic studies that go in depth about the Maidan coup and about the snipers who fired on protesters and the police. And that work is now being suppressed, as we covered yesterday. Kachinovsky's work is now being suppressed by the U.S. State Department and by the Academy, various academic journals at every turn, because they don't want the truth to get out, even though it's a rigorous academic analysis of what happened. But literally, it was a band of neo-Nazis, this small percentage of people who really did want to, take Ukraine and attack Russia, despite knowing that Ukraine's military was not up to those standards and wasn't ready for such a thing. And he took those violent extremists and put them in power of the government, and then just tried to build them up to the point where they could actually attack Russia. And that's the thing. More and more of those troops were being trained, and they were being trained to be NATO interoperable, meaning those troops could, work with any NATO battalion from any country in Europe or North America. They could work together. That's what NATO was doing with Ukraine's troops, building up troops after they had installed this neo-Nazi government, and after they had promised Russia that they wouldn't add Ukraine to NATO. We won't add Ukraine to NATO. We'll just install a NATO puppet dictatorship, and then start making all of Ukraine's troops NATO interoperable, including the neo-Nazis, who, by the way, we added to the actual Ukrainian military. So they're part of the actual military now, and they hate Russian people, and they don't think that speaking Russian should be legal in their country. But don't worry, don't worry. That's not us inflaming hostilities with Russia. Everything's fine. Russia was unprovoked. Oh, to say Russia was unprovoked. When people say that, I'm like, what fucking world do you live in? Like, what? How empty is your brain? Or like, what world do you live in? Where, like, what? It's hard for me because I don't trust mainstream media anymore. So I usually just consume things from academic sources or, journalists who I know actually have integrity, or alternative media, not people who are just telling blatant lies. So then when I talk to somebody who watches Fox News or MSNBC all day and they're like, Russia was unprovoked, I'm like, wow, the fuck? Like, how do they even make that argument? How can anyone even make that argument? And then I watch MSNBC for 2 seconds. I'm like, oh, that's how. They just lie. Just make everything up. They live in the world of the U.S. State Department. Yes, it's like the Twilight Zone. It's a world where the media gives you the opposite of reality. 100 Ukraine Nazi support from the West, but Russia was unprovoked. Yes. There was something lately where, gosh, who published that? It was either Breaking Points or the Gray Zone, but there was some rally in Washington, D.C., where the people were literally saying, we are the Washington, D.C. arm of Right Sector, which Right Sector is this far-right ethno-nationalist political party in Ukraine that has its own paramilitary. That was obviously heavily involved in the Maidan coup and heavily funded by Western NGOs. So you have a group in Washington, D.C. claiming that they're an arm of Right Sector, and there were Biden officials at that rally supporting it. Supporting it! Well, we were talking last stream about how close the U.S. government is to fascism, right? There you go. Friggin' the Biden administration is having Right Sector speakers to do rallies and supporting them. Insane. Wow, thank you so much, Ben Feldman. $20 super chat. Gotten lots of super chats today. Really, really appreciate that, y'all. Midwestern Marks wouldn't be possible without you. Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Keep up the good work, Eddie, and Midwestern Marks team. You guys make Marxism so clear and accessible. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Ben. I really am. When I first started out, I'll give you a little story time, because you gave us a $20 super chat, and I really appreciate that. But when I was first starting out with Marxism, it is hard to piece through everything, right? It was just hard to get these ideas in a simple form, and the ideas are so complex. Every time you think something simple about Marxism, you're like, is that right? Do I have that right, or is it a little bit wrong, right? Which is good to question yourself and stuff. But then there's so many wreckers. Right? There's so many people who are purposefully putting out misinformation, and it's not just right-wingers, right? Like, once you read a little bit of Marx and get an understanding, it's easy to see that Ben Shapiro is lying to you about Marxism, right? He's just making stuff up that isn't real. But there's also people like Vish. There's also people on the left who will lie to you about Marxism and distort Marxism. And if you have a Marxist-Leninist outlook on the world, they'll be like, that's overly simplistic. You're just an idiot. You just need to read these postmodernist liberal Marxists. They're the real smart ones because they use a bunch of academic gobbledygook language when they write. And Lenin wrote concise and simple. So either way, my goal with Midwestern Marx has always been to make Marxism concise and accessible for people, and also do it and make Marxism, use Marxism in an academic way, use Marxism to engage with all the arguments against Marxism. Like, I recently did the article about the neoclassicals, and we've done a lot of stuff about postmodernism, which I also mentioned in my article about neoclassical economics, right? So using Marxism to try and in a simple way, attack the main arguments against Marxism, which may make people confused when they're just starting out. So giving people easy to understand knowledge so they can grasp Marxism themselves, and then attacking in an easy to understand way a lot of the lies and misconceptions about Marxism that are put out there by wreckers or put out there, a lot of times literally by the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the controlled opposition of the ruling class. So I'm glad to hear that you think that we make Marxism clear and accessible. Moral of the story. Thank you for the $20 super chat. Solidarity forever. Vaush is a neoliberal. Yes. Yeah, that's why I say left, right? Because left, I think of as, anything socialistic, anything in favor of the workers. But if you think about left as just anyone who's nominally left in the U.S., anyone who's not a conservative, like there's a whole lot of MAGA Republicans who I think are more pro-working class than a lot of the liberals you'll see and talk to. So that's why I say left. Long live the immortal science of Marxism, Leninism, and all the advances we have achieved with it as a powerful weapon. Facts, Dust. Thank you. And I mean, that's when I was first starting out with geopolitics, I was like, man, it sure seems like China's got it figured out. It sure seems like China is actually a socialist country and they're just like playing the long game. Right. And then I read Xi Jinping's Governance of China. That was one of the first books I read. And it all sort of started to come together for me, where I was like, okay, these people that say we don't have real socialism or China's not socialist, those people I think are confused. And then after reading Marx's Capital, I'm like, they're definitely confused. He supports NAFTA. Who supports NAFTA? NAFTA sucked. Which expropriated indigenous farmers in Mexico, the entire reason for the Zapatista uprising. NAFTA's been bad all around. Vush supports NAFTA? Dude. Like, what the... Why even put on the facade of being a socialist at that point? There's no way. Like, I'm used to him pretending to be a socialist and conflating socialism with liberal social values, and then supporting imperialism, right? He supports capitalist imperialism. But NAFTA? NAFTA destroyed the U.S. too. Like, how could you claim to be a socialist and support a free trade deal? Like, I mean, it's the same with imperialism, right? Like, how do you be a socialist and support imperialism? But there's more lies, right? There's more ways that I could see you getting tricked into supporting imperialism, being deceived by the media. And Vaush is such an arrogant person. Like, it doesn't surprise me that he just thinks he's got it all figured out. And all the socialists telling him he's an imperialist are just wrong and they're idiots and they don't know as well as him. But NAFTA, who on the left supports NAFTA? So does Dylan Burns. Okay. Well, I'm not surprised. That guy's basically a Vush clone. NAFTA and GATT were both bad. And the TPP. Did the TPP ever go through, or did it get held up? And then they just tried to basically push it through in bits and pieces via executive orders and stuff. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. But yeah, these free trade deals not only devastated the countries where that were impacted by that, or the imperialized countries that were impacted by them, like Mexico, like this person says, and it literally triggered an uprising. And now Mexico is moving, towards more anti-imperialism and socialism. But it was terrible for the U.S. too. It allowed these multinationals to outsource so many jobs, right? Because there was no longer any tariffs on trade. So if there's a place where they can manufacture things while paying their workers $1 an hour, they're going to outsource the jobs over there. So all these different places in the Rust Belt where I'm from in the Midwest were destroyed. The jobs left overseas, and what came in was opioids, because at the same time in the early 2000s, the opioid crisis was kicking off. They were beginning to prescribe them for pain and anxiety. So a lot of these places were ravaged by addiction and overdose deaths, as all the jobs were outsourced to places where the capitalists could get extremely cheap labor. That is what NAFTA and TPP and these free trade deals did to the U.S. Like, what?
Do you guys know that the YouTuber Vorsh is apparently just like a massive fucking neoliberal? You got to watch the clip to understand what I mean. And I think like anyone who is like even remotely on the left, like even a social democrat or something, will be able to watch this clip and understand immediately what I mean by neoliberal, because this is like literal, like just verbatim, meaningless neoliberal buzzword salad. Like talking about like economic freedom resulting in prosperity and shit, and how like neoliberal free trade agreements like NAFTA are good. It wouldn't be interesting or even worth mentioning if it wasn't coming from someone who is professed to be like a anarchist socialist on the left or something, who considers themselves like an arbiter of what is left, and with a community that also believes that about themselves. Like straight up saying shit like this is absolutely absurd. So here's the clip. It was uploaded, by the way, by like a guy who, or someone who like edits Vorsh's clips for them for free. So that's an additional pathetic layer here. Just watch this. Every single thing that he says here is neoliberal ideology in its purest, the most obvious form. And I'll of course going to go into way too much depth after we watch this to explain this. So don't worry. I'm capable of backing.
Dust, I just want to point this out. Dust says Bad Empanada is also a lib that attacks anti-imperialists. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Bad Empanada. I reacted to him, or I mean, I guess I don't know him as a person, but a lot of his opinions I disagree with. I said once that he used the Michael Parenti quote from the 90s to say that, to argue that we shouldn't support modern China. You know, and I felt like that was a really fallacious argument. And then like the last video, he said that there's no revolution in the first world. There's no revolution in the imperialist countries. I really, really, really disagree with that. And you can scroll back to that segment if you want. And Bad Empanada does make a lot of good videos. He made a great video about Che Guevara. He makes good Vouch takedowns, but like the standard needs to be higher than that, right? Like we live in a neoliberal hegemon of a country. So we're all beat over the head with neoliberalism. Like the standard for socialist Marxist educators, I think, should be higher than, you know, they don't like Vouch, because Vouch is literally an imperialist neolib. But, you know, that's not to say I wouldn't ally with Bad Empanada on things, or I don't agree with Bad Empanada on things, or I don't think Bad Empanada does good work, because he does, you know, and I do think that. I think he's an intelligent person. I just always want to make it clear when people talk about him, I don't watch him all the time, or he's not like my favorite, because I have a handful of pretty important theoretical disagreements with him.
That up. But I feel like if you consider yourself a leftist or a socialist or something, you probably already should understand why this is exactly what I just said it is. But apparently Vorsh doesn't. Like, I don't know. I feel like someone who's been like a supposedly leftist streamer for like 3 years knows that what they're saying here is just neoliberal ideology par excellence. You know, I can't give him the benefit of the doubt here and say that he's just being dumb, because he has to know what he's saying, right?
What do you think about Ukraine joining the EU? I think it's a great thing. The European Union has its bureaucratic issues, but for the most part, it seems to legitimately increase the economic freedom of people in those countries, and it makes them more prosperous. So, you know, fine. I'm generally a pretty big fan of regional trade blocs, you know? It's really just a way of how they're handled. Like NAFTA had its problems, but the concept of like facilitating strong economic mobility within a region is good. You know what I mean? Like that's actually a good thing, you know? I would love to live in a North America where Mexico, Canada, and America are all just like regional buddies. People can travel to and from the work, no big deal, no big border crossing issues, whatever, like the EU has. The EU has been, I think, a generally good thing. I understand there are problems. I understand that there.
It would be nice if they were just all buddies. You mean like socialist economic cooperation? You mean like a trade policy of mutual development, like what China does? Because NAFTA is literally just allowing Western multinationals to have free reign to pillage these countries, and not only pillage them, but outsource certain jobs so that they can essentially profit off of sweatshop labor in these countries. It's a way for the U.S. to rob Mexico. It's not a way for them to just be buddies. Like it's so obvious he doesn't even know what NAFTA is. He doesn't even know what it is. Like, oh, it's based on good principles. They were talking about freedom a lot when they released NAFTA. The State Department officials who came up with NAFTA said it's supposed to bring freedom. Why wouldn't we want closer partnership with Mexico? Because it's designed to rob Mexico, and you would know that if you were an actual political analyst, but you're not. You're a streamer and a gamer who probably is being handed a lot of the stuff you say by freaking State Department ops, or State Department ops who just chill in your chat.
There are some bureaucratic regulations that people don't like, and they don't like having an extra governmental agency above the nation state that, I get that. But for the most part, I think it's a good thing. And I think it'll be good for the people of Ukraine.
Everything that he said there is not just wrong, but the most base sort of like neoliberal NPC talking points imaginable. Like economic freedom resulting in economic prosperity. Like, do I need to explain that economic freedom is just a euphemism used by neoliberals to mean the freedom for businesses to do whatever the fuck they want, which obviously, if you're on the left, is a bad thing for you, right? Like economic freedom in the sense that he's using it here, in the sense that
feels like he supports
trade blocks, as he calls them. They're not really blocks because they're not actually beneficial for everyone inside them. Like the EU and NAFTA, when they talk about...
Right, that's the thing. They're not blocks. They're not trade blocks. They're predatory trade deals designed by Western finance capitalists to rob countries, not only of their resources and not only have access to their markets, but their cheap labor. And if those countries, try and raise the minimum wage or have a lot of unions or whatever, that's when we see coups and active regime change efforts. But in order to benefit most, in order to maximize the exploitation of these countries by Western multinationals, they need to have these free trade deals. Otherwise, there will be tariffs, protectionist tariffs. Otherwise, the country could say, yeah, we don't want the U.S. to exploit all of our lithium, so we're going to put a tariff on lithium exports, right? And encourage people who mine lithium to sell domestically, to trade their lithium within our country. So our own lithium resources go to build our own country up. But with free trade deals, if you can't put any tariffs on, any taxes on exports, there's no ability for countries to do protectionist trade policy. So multinationals can just take all the resources they want from these countries, and it disincentivizes multinationals from bringing jobs home domestically in the U.S. because it's easier for them to outsource jobs because they can just produce the raw materials over there and then trade them over here because there's no tariffs, there's no taxes on the trade.
Economic freedom, what they mean is essentially any sort of barrier to capital being able to do what it wants. So it's economic freedom for the bourgeoisie, basically. So it means like, stuff like having like trade unions, strong trade unions, for example, actually lowers economic freedom according to the way that they use this term. And they're the only ones who use this term at all, by the way. So it's obvious that's the way they're using it. Things like trade unions, workers' rights, any sort of barrier to the free export and import of capital, any sort of regulation. These are all things that are considered to lower economic freedom. And that's why it's literally a fucking measure that was essentially coined and created by neoliberal think tank. Like, for example, the phrase.
So this was created by a Koch-funded think tank. And I looked into it a lot because one of the Koch-funded guys, I can't remember where he was from. I think the Heritage Foundation or something. He came to my college. He came to my school, and the economics professor was a Keynesian sort of social democrat type guy. And he knew that I was a socialist, so he asked me to come to the event and give pushback to the guy. And I did, but I actually thought his freedom index was really interesting because the freedom index is kind of useful. Right? What the freedom index measures is how free a country's economy is to multinationals, right? How free it is to exploit their resources and labor, right? So freedom means no minimum wage, no labor regulations, no unions, no protectionist trade policy. Their markets are free and open to be pillaged by Western multinationals, right? Freedom equals freedom of exploitation. And this is something that the capitalists have always done, right? They talk about freedom and prosperity. What they mean is freedom of markets and prosperity for the corporations exploiting those markets. They don't actually mean freedom for the majority of people. And the freedom index invented by these think tanks is the ultimate expression of that, right? It's literally them saying, we're going to rank you on a scale of 0 to 100 based on how open your markets are to be pillaged by us, by the multinationals who created this index. So I actually used the freedom index, the economic freedom index in my research, right? Because like I remember when I was looking into Iran for the very first time, it's like, why does the U.S. want to destroy Iran? The first thing I looked at was the economic freedom index. Oh, okay. It says they don't have any economic freedom. It says that all their banks are controlled by the government and all their major industry is controlled by the government. And it's used for social programs and stuff. No wonder the U.S. wants to overthrow them, right? They want to gain access to Iran's resources. So any country that doesn't rank highly on economic freedom or on the economic freedom index is a country going against the U.S.'s wishes and having more government, state, public control of their economy. And then a country who ranks highly on the economic index, like Australia or whatever else, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, Hong Kong. See a lot of close U.S. allies on here. Those are countries who the U.S. loves because multinationals are already heavily invested there. So yeah, shout out to what was that guy's name? Terry Miller, I think. Terry Miller of some think tank. Well, I think it was the Heritage Foundation. Yeah, it was Ambassador Terry Miller. This was the guy. This was the guy who pitched me the Economic Freedom Index. And then my friend said, I asked him, so how are you going? And this was me in college. I would have provided a lot more pushback against him nowadays. But in college, I was like, so how can you say that economic growth and endless economic growth is inherently good and always going to be a positive thing when we have finite resources and when we're facing a climate crisis? Right. And my friend, he gave me some answer about how we're always going to need economic development, so we can combat the climate, or like he said, the market will eventually combat climate crisis or whatever. And then my friend said something about how the government should intervene and do something. And this guy goes, what do you want to put a windmill on every house in Uganda? I'll never forget that shit. Socialism is when you want to put a windmill on every house in Uganda. Terry Miller. And my friend said nothing like that. He said he was literally just saying, like, shouldn't we like invest in solar and like renewables? Like, what do you want to put a windmill on every house in Uganda? I remember my buddy was like, no, what? He's like, he was so flustered. He's like, I didn't say that. Fucking hilarious. The Vaush be like the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom seems leftist. Facts. The only real leftists, according to Vaush, are Thatcher and Reagan. Like, what the heck? Wasn't Keynes also anti-Semitic? I have no idea. I have not read Keynes. I haven't. Our good friend Radhika Desai, who, like me, has spent a lot. Well, I shouldn't say like me, who in a way much better than me, and in a way that's been very helpful for me in studying for my own research, attacked neoclassical economics and the utility theory of value in order to argue for the labor theory of value in Marxist economics. But what Radhika says is that the only bourgeois economist to really make advances in the field of economics and in the science of economics after Marx was John Maynard Keynes. Because John Maynard Keynes was honest about the economy, and if you read what Keynes described as his ideal society, which is often, considered a social democratic society, a mixed economy, he's basically describing socialism. He's basically describing worker ownership. He just thought that capitalism would transition to that naturally without a revolution, which has obviously been proven wrong. But, his ultimate goal was socialism, which the U.S. president, or which U.S. president was like Nixon or something, said, we are all Keynesians now, famously saying that we all agree in a mixed economy now, no trickle down. I can't remember who said that. Maybe it was Nixon. And then obviously later on, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan's economist, Art Laffer, would bring trickle-down economics into prominence and say, let all the money go to the top. It'll trickle down eventually. Trust us. Doesn't even sound like a good idea. You know, it sounds ridiculous on its face, especially now. But yeah. So Keynes was definitely a reformist, but I think it was his theory of effective demand, Radica Desai, was actually a scientific theory that Marx hadn't looked at or come up with, or any Marxists that, you know, Marxists should study. So I've always been meaning to study Keynes. It'd be a really, really important person to study, because obviously the Keynesian school played a huge role in the last century, the 20th century and 20th century economics, especially in the U.S. I mean, we had one of our presidents literally said we're all Keynesians now. So windmills on every house would be dope, right? Like, I'm not against windmills in every house in Uganda. Like, I know the Terry Miller guy just kind of made that up, and we never said that. And it was nothing but a straw man argument, but it's a straw man argument that could become a steel man argument, because windmills on every house in Uganda would be so cool. Even though, aren't windmills bad for birds or something? I don't know. There's always going to be some problems with building new infrastructure. Who said we're all Keynesians now? Famous phrase attributed to Milton Friedman. Oh, that's interesting, because he was not really a Keynesian. He was neoclassical. Later rephrased by U.S. President Nixon. Ah, look at that. I nailed it. What's good, y'all? What's up, Sam? How are you? The EU financed a big project for holes in roofs to save electricity in Africa. That's really nice of them. I'm sure if you looked into it, it would not be that benevolent. Like, have any of you read my article that I wrote this year about Bill Gates and his efforts in Africa? His charitable efforts in Africa were literally nothing but a pure scam. Nothing but a pure scam to get himself more money, to sell more fertilizer, and to give him more control of African agriculture. And the African agricultural experts and government officials had a literal summit. They came together at a summit and they said, stop doing this, Bill Gates. Your green revolution has failed. So Bill Gates launched this green revolution to bring Africa fertilizer and agricultural development with charity using the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And African agricultural experts came out at the summit and said, no, all you've done is poison our soil with this Western fertilizer and make yourself money while decreasing access to food in Africa. Please stop. Please leave. And Bill Gates didn't acknowledge the summit. The summit was not published in Western media. And instead, Bill Gates did an interview 2 days later where he didn't mention the summit, didn't mention that it happened, but admitted, yes, the Green Revolution has failed to meet any of its intended goals. We haven't done a single thing that we said we were going to do. All we've done is increase our fertilizer and agricultural equipment profits and the profits of Western multinationals who sell those commodities. But don't worry, we're going to be redoubling our efforts. We're going to be redoubling our charitable donations, and we're going to get way more fertilizer and way more equipment. So he literally, after they had this summit, he did an interview with a mainstream media outlet and said, we're going to do the opposite of what the African agricultural experts said we should do in this summit. We're going to do the opposite, and I'm going to keep using charity that I get a tax write-off on. I give myself a pat on the back for doing all this charity. I'm going to continue using that to boost my own fertilizer sales, boost the sales of my agricultural equipment, poisoning the African soil, and then acting like I'm saving the African people. Like I'm the savior who's going to bring them agriculture and going to bring them food. When they're literally holding summits just to say, get the hell out of our country. But the arrogance of Bill Gates to go to the mainstream media a day or two after they held this summit and just say the opposite. Yeah, I'm going to buy more fertilizer. What are you going to do about it? Scumbag. But yeah, charity's a scam. The Nazi veterans of the Maidan coup. Sorry, I was looking for a comment earlier. Nazi veterans of the Maidan coup openly say that without them there to actually commit the violences, it would just have devolved into a pride parade. Effing Nazis, bro. It's crazy. Yeah, that's the thing, too. And that's why the U.S. had to tie themselves to the most extremist elements. Like, in a lot of these places, the U.S. is trying to destabilize. You know, the vast majority of people don't want destabilization. They don't want violence. Like, that's the problem the U.S. is having in Taiwan right now. Nobody wants to be pushed at gunpoint into a military conflict with China, the same way the Ukrainian military is right now. So what the U.S. has had to do, and they had to do this in Syria and Libya as well, in forming these right-wing coalitions, which is what it was called in Ukraine, the Maidan coalition. It's just all the biggest extremists, right? So maybe there's a lot of regular people who are protesting at Euromaidan. There's a lot of people who aren't violent. But then the U.S. will give a bunch of arms and give a bunch of money and coordinate the violent extremists that do exist, even if it's only 2% of the population, and get them to escalate the situation into what we saw at Euromaidan. What we saw with like the 70 people who were killed by snipers that we now know were part of the right-wing extremist coalition. And so the U.S. funds right sector. The U.S. funds the Azov battalion. And, you know, these people rose to prominence. These were the people who led the takeover of the Ukrainian government in 2014. And then you have folks now like, oh, how can you say Ukraine's a Nazi state? You think everybody in Ukraine's a Nazi? No, I don't. I think the people who the U.S. and the U.S. NGOs gave a bunch of arms, funding, coordination, and assistance to were the Nazis, were the violent extremists, because those were the only people who the U.S. knew would escalate Maidan into a violent coup. Those were the people who the U.S. trusted to take weapons and literally overthrow the Yanukovych government like they did, and then wage a war against Russia. Right? So the U.S. took the most extremist part of the population, the most extremist ideology in the population, even though it was a minority ideology. They fostered it, helped it grow, and then brought it to the forefront, brought it to power of the country. And when Nazis march openly in the street, it means police and the government gave them the green light. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Gates is pushing this on Microsoft Edge. No way. If you use their Bing Maps tool, it shows you where they're growing trees in Africa, and it's like a tiny area. Libs buy into the shit and think they're helping, but it's fueling Gates' presence in Africa doing shady shit. Absolutely. Absolutely is what it's doing. And there's the weaponization of compassion that you get from neoliberals. We're the good guys. Support our efforts. Give us your money. We're doing charity. We're not poisoning their soil with fertilizer and using their markets to make a whole bunch of money. And meanwhile, China has planted a forest the size of Ireland. Right? If you just had a planned mode of production, if we would just move away from capitalism, we could combat deforestation and ecological degradation super easy. Right? Our military is running around the world. Sorry, I'm trying to kill this fly. Our military is running around the world killing people for oil right now. You know, attacking countries like or countries that are less developed than us and destroying their industry. And China's military is planting a forest the size of Ireland. We could do that. We could transition our military into forest planters and builders, but we'd have to move away from capitalism. China W, of course, as always. I have my Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism reading guide plan, but I might save that for when I have a little more energy. We'll see. Imagine if the military was used to mitigate the effects of the recent pandemic. Imagine there was some lady who works as a janitor at one of the colleges I used to go to, and she made like 1,000 masks for people, just produced them herself, which is everyone thought was amazing, right? Everyone thought was the nicest thing ever because we're so conditioned to not ever give anybody labor unless we're making money for it, right? Do not labor and work hard at anything unless you're being paid for it. Never work for free is something I've heard a million times since becoming an adult. So she was volunteering her domestic labor essentially to produce a commodity that everyone needed, a use value that everyone needed, where we had a shortage of masks in the richest country in the world because our production is so irrational. But I remember thinking too, and I was already a socialist by the pandemic, obviously, and had started Midwestern Marx. But I'm like, why do we have to rely on this overworked janitor to produce masks for everybody? Why can't the giant pharmaceutical companies or any company do this? Because they don't want to waste labor. Those corporations need to use labor to make money. Been in a lot of pain this week. Sorry to hear that, comrade. Really glad I saw the live. Good end to a bad week. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad we could be here for you. Not every week is a good one, especially under capitalism. So much love. I hope you get through it, and I'm glad we can be of some relief to you. Corporations want one thing, go line up. So one of my buddies who's an engineer, we talk about, I love talking to engineers because they just have such a practical view of production, and it's so easy for them to see how production is irrational. And also they're not unionized, so a lot of times they're this class of workers that's kind of above the manufacturing workers, but they see how hard the manufacturing workers have it, and they relate to their problems and their complaints and their grievances. But my buddy who is an engineer told me that he's like, you ever been in like a giant office building, like a building filled with cubicles? And I was like, yeah, but not a lot. You know, I've never worked in a place like that. And he's like, yeah, it's like a human farm. It's a farm for humans where they extract humans' mental labor. And I was like, that is a creepy way to think about it. And I couldn't get it out of my head. Like, that's literally what it is. They have humans lined up in their pens where you're not allowed to leave, and they're extracting mental labor out of you. That's what I do at my computer every day, but I'm laboring for Midwestern Marx, not in a human farm. Yep, that's accurate. It is. It's a good analogy, but it's like a scary one. Yeah, you might as well hook humans up to like milk machines and just start milking us of our mental energy. Solidarity on both. Pain and insomnia sucks so bad. Absolutely. Those are problems I used to have. I've since figured out some therapies that have really, really, really changed my life. But who gave you permission to exit your cubicle? I guess Eddie can't see my question. I was looking for it. That's literally what I'm looking for in the chat right now. This one. When I hear the Marxist definition of fascism, it just sounds like social democracy, the government solving capitalism. Kind of. I mean, using violence and bigotry and destruction to save capitalism, not giving the workers health care or social welfare programs so that they won't rise up. But similar things. How do you feel about the right to die with assisted suicide, even for healthy people or for healthy young people? It seems like a fundamental right to me. I think that, I mean, yeah, for people who are terminally ill and suffering, I don't know where to draw the line on young people. If people are in just severe pain and there's no quality of life there, that's where I support it. But like, I would love to see in a socialist, I don't think we should encourage people to do it, right? I don't think we should just allow young people to walk into a clinic one day and do assisted suicide, honestly. I don't think that's where our resources go. I think it should be, all our resources should be diverted. If it's someone doing it for depression, right? If it's not someone who's in just severe pain and they have been and they know they can't fight it and they just want to, move on, life is too painful. But if it's like a young person, we should continually divert them to therapy and things that can help them and put them in a positive environment before we resort to assisted suicide. So I think I would combat the idea that it's a fundamental right. I think it's a right if you're dying, but I don't think we should promote, ending your life if you're healthy. You should contribute to your community, contribute to society, and, try and live a fulfilling life. You don't have that long on this earth. But like most of the assisted suicides that are happening right now in Canada is tragic. It's people who are homeless and people who are poor, people who can't handle the economic hardships of day-to-day life, right? So it's being used as an alternative to capitalism. Literally, people saying death is better than being in this system, right? Now, I would love to see how the assisted suicide rates in Canada, where they're allowing it for pretty much anyone. Or I shouldn't say that. They're more lenient with it. I'd love to see how the assisted suicide rates go down, right? Because everybody doing it is quoting economic reasons for why they want to. It's just so sick. It's so sick that our system doesn't take care of people to the point where they just want to kill themselves before they would live, before they would continue their lives and continue being with their families and being with their friends. So I just think it's sick and sad. And that's where my brain goes, rather than jumping to like defending assisted suicide for people who aren't terminally ill and in a lot of pain. Like, my mind goes to what can we do for those people to actually treat their problems, especially because I've been studying healthcare administration for my grad degree. And there's this great essay in a book called The Second Sickness by Howard Waitskin. And it's about how doctors and the medical system within capitalism has this inherent contradiction or this inherent problem where they're trying to fix the ills of capitalism, the sickness that capitalism induces people with, the overwork and the exploitation and the alienation, without being able to change people's daily activities, right? So somebody comes into the doctor, they're overworked and they're tired and they're sick and they say, help me. And the doctor can't tell them to take a week off of work. Right? The doctor can't tell them to spend more time with their kids or spend more time cooking healthy food or whatever. They might be able to tell them that, but it's going to be hard for the person because they're working and just trying to get by all the time. So then what the easiest thing for doctors to prescribe are things that mask the symptoms, like opioids, or, maybe they'll give you stimulants so you can get fired up more during the day and be less tired. But it's so difficult for them to treat symptoms in a system that makes people sick systematically. And then assisted suicide is just like, the easiest out for the healthcare system, for the medical system. Like, people are so sad, so beat down, so sick from this system that the only thing we can come up with to help them is assisted suicide at this point. So also from a healthcare administration perspective, I see it like that as sort of a failure of the capitalist system. But thank you so much for the super chat and the very, very interesting question. Stalin wrote that social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism. Yeah. I mean, there is a ton of overlap, and historically the social Dems always tend to side with the fascists. Like, look what AOC and Bernie and all these progressives in Congress are lining up behind the Azov battalion and the Ukrainian neo-Nazis backed by NATO right now. And there are more obvious examples. Probably the most blatant one in Germany was when the Social Democrats allied with the fascists to kill Rosa Luxemburg, the leader of the German socialist movement. So in that time of economic crisis, Germany, instead of moving towards socialism and communism, moved the opposite direction. They moved towards Hitlerism and fascism and Nazism, because of the collaboration between the Social Democrats and the fascists. The Social Democrats allow and facilitate the fascists the same way AOC, Bernie, and the Social Democrats of today are facilitating the fascists in Ukraine. It's something that's always been in the history of Social Democrats. So to call it the moderate wing of fascism, I think is on point. Old Stalin, Stally boy, Joseph. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Doug Jeffrey, and the very timely and relevant quote from Comrade Stalin. Getting all the super chats tonight. Sadly, there's been an overcorrection on opioids. Now people who really need them have a hard time getting them. There's many suicides because of it. Yeah, and it's just they're not weaning people off of them. They're trying to make kratom illegal. The FDA is, because kratom has been shown to wean people off of opioids, which is a different discussion. But and I wrote about this a lot in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, which if you're interested in healthcare at all, and knowing what's wrong with our healthcare system, check out the Journal of American Socialist Studies. I got it up there. It's on our website, ebook for $10, or just become a Midwestern Marx Patreon or YouTube member for $10, and you get a link to it. But either way, write about the opioid crisis and the treatment programs and the response to it. So there's been an overcorrection, just like not prescribing people opioids anymore rather than weaning them off, which leads to people going through withdrawals and then committing suicide because they don't have any support or any way to wean off. And, I mean, that's always been like the majority of people killed by the opioid crisis start with prescription painkillers. Then they run out of money and they can't afford anymore. And they are, ending their prescription halfway through every month. So they go buy heroin, right? Or they go buy fentanyl is the other huge killer. So it's always been a thing where the pharmaceutical companies will sell you a bunch of opioids until you can't pay for them, and then you're on your own. So them just refusing to give certain people opioids is, it is an overcorrection, and it's also a continuation of what's always been happening, I think, where it's all about money for these pharmaceutical companies. So they're not going to do for people what's best for people. Also, and this is what I heavily focus on in the Journal of American Socialist Studies, the treatment programs for opioids have been privatized. They're profit-based. A lot of times they're owned by the same people who sell the opioids, like the Sackler family and these shareholders who own Purdue Pharma, which went out of business once they faced legislation because they created the opioid crisis, but then just reorganized and became Noah Pharma. And now they do the same thing, right? And a lot of those lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industry, they said, oh, you got to put your money into addiction treatment now, right? You caused this opioid crisis. You got to pay for the addiction treatment. Well, guess who owns the addiction treatment? The same people. So these shareholders just put money into building these for-profit rehab centers, which are essentially like luxury spas that only rich people on drugs can afford. And hundreds of thousands of people have continued to die every year. They're like, oh, we'll just cut down the prescription of opioids. Like, okay, but people are already addicted. They need to be weaned off now. But you just leave them in withdrawal in this horrible state of pain and anxiety where you can't experience joy for like a week. And then if people commit suicide, oh, no sweat off the Sackler family's back. They're still one of the richest families in the world after creating this opioid crisis. Literally, still one of the wealthiest families in the world after it's been proven, and they face legislation for actively creating the opioid crisis while knowing the entire time the risks of addiction and overdose. They knew the entire time and they lied anyways. And you can find all of this in the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2 on MidwesternMarx.com in the article that I wrote about it. That's why so many people are forced into the streets that get the opioids too. They're making money on both ends, so they don't care. It is. That's the best way to describe it, making money on both ends. They sell you the opioids. They cut off your opioids once you're hooked and you need them. You can't afford them, and they can't make money off you. And then if you can afford the treatment, they're going to make money off that. If you can't afford the treatment, you're homeless, you lose your family and your life and your job. Oh, well, Sackler family still have $6 billion. They don't give a shit. It's the most disgusting thing ever. And especially when you think about the way that because of NAFTA and the free trade deals that we just watch Voosh praise, those deals have outsourced so many jobs, deindustrialized so many towns, manufacturing towns like in the Midwest and the Rust Belt. And then these pharmaceutical companies came in at the exact same time that these free trade deals were being passed in the 90s and early 2000s and said, oh, you're experiencing anxiety and pain, are you? Here's a pill. Here's this Oxycontin that'll take it away. But we're also going to take your job away. And then you're going to be left with no job and you're going to have an opioid addiction. And, same goes for the whole community here. And so many, where the jobs flooded out, the opioids flooded in. And then these people who did it are still the richest families in the world. They're still selling opioids. They're still selling and profiting off of opioid treatment. Well said. Somewhat related. I'm on a low dose of naltrexone for chronic pain. So expensive. Medicare won't cover. That's so sad. I'm sorry, Insomniac. It is too bad. I feel for you. If anyone out there is trying to wean off opioids, try Kratom. It's a plant that has similar chemical properties to opioids and has really been shown to alleviate some of the withdrawal symptoms, which is why the FDA is now trying to make them illegal because they want to continue profiting off of not only opioids, but the treatment of opioids. But now all these poor addicts and pain patients are being killed by fentanyl-laced heroin. Yep. So sad. Did y'all see that video of the cop who overdosed and said that the fentanyl blew in her nose during a traffic stop? It's like, oh, the cocaine laced with fentanyl. The wind got it and blew it in my nose. Or you took the drugs while doing a traffic stop and you snorted them and you thought it was cocaine and it was fentanyl. Police officer lady. Spread the word. Thanks. Of course. I mean, I don't know if it'll work, but it does help. Are there any baby boomers in chat? I hope so. I don't just want to speak to the young generations. See if I can find this. I don't know.
Shocking body cam video released tonight by the San Diego Sheriff's Department. It shows a deputy on the brink of death after being exposed to fentanyl. The deputy saved by his partner who was equipped with the life-saving medicine known as Narcan. We do want to warn you, what you're about to see is difficult to watch.
I'm not gonna let you die. I need Narcan! I got you.
Dramatic body cam video capturing the moment Corporal Scott Crane of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department is promising his trainee, Deputy David Five-Eye, he's not going to let him die after Five-Eye was exposed to fentanyl while processing drugs at the scene of an arrest in early July.
See, this isn't the video I was thinking about, but this seems like the same thing. Oh, you were processing the drugs and you were exposed to it? I mean, not to accuse anyone of anything, but it sounds like you just did the drugs, which cops do all the time is, seize drugs from people and then take them. Let's see.
This could still happen.
Chief Sarah Corsi says Bannock was in prolonged contact with the drugs as she helped revive Courtney Bannock. Cam video shows Officer Courtney Bannock struggling to keep consciousness after possible exposure to fentanyl. 3 doses of Narcan were given to help reverse the effects.
Breathe. Come on, breathe.
Hit her again. Rodney, she's not breathing. Hit her again.
The Tavares Police Department say lab testing of the drugs on scene confirmed them to be positive for fentanyl and meth.
She was wearing the gloves. We did everything right, and this could still happen.
Chief Sarah Corsi says Bannock was in prolonged contact with the drugs as she searched the suspects and their car.
It could have been just a gust of wind that went in her tear duct. It could have gone near her mouth, her nose. It could have gone on her arm, and she wiped the sweat. It could have been anything, but she followed proper procedures.
There's been an ongoing debate between law enforcement and...
She was wearing gloves. We don't know how it happened. She followed proper procedures until she snorted the cocaine. From the upper West Virginia, 30 minutes west of Pittsburgh, and you just described my hometown, a former steel town. Wow. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Justin Lips Watson. Yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania and Ohio have been hit even worse than like Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, whatever, those sections of the Rust Belt or the Midwest. The traditional Rust Belt is Ohio and Pennsylvania, where you have all this like steel and industrial manufacturing that's been outsourced by the free trade deals, which is part of how Trump won the 2016 election. Because Bill Clinton was the one behind NAFTA and supported TPP, or Hillary supported TPP. I believe that was being pushed by Obama. But Reagan got NAFTA signed, not Reagan. Bill Clinton got NAFTA signed. Bill Clinton, sort of the OG neoliberal. OG neoliberal from the Democratic Party. Reagan was obviously the OG neoliberal in the U.S. But either way, he got these free trade deals signed that led to people's jobs being outsourced, where Justin Lips Watson and I said and experienced, where opioids replaced the jobs. And then Hillary Clinton refused to campaign in those areas, refused to campaign in the Rust Belt, whereas Trump kept going there. Trump kept going to Pennsylvania and Ohio and saying, I'm going to bring your jobs back. Bill Clinton got rid of your jobs. Hillary's husband got rid of your jobs. I'm bringing them back. And Hillary thought that she was going to win those states for sure somehow, and she didn't, because her husband had outsourced all their jobs and she didn't campaign there ever. And Trump won, a massive upset in the election because people were sick of the Clintons and politicians lying to them and outsourcing their jobs. So thank you very much for the super chat, Justin. You're from West Virginia, outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So very interesting to hear from somebody in one of those manufacturing towns. There's a good song. Hello, Xenon Tuning. There's a good song called Broken Window Serenade. That's what it's called. By Whiskey Myers. And if you listen to the guys talk about it, their song that they wrote, they say it describes their hometown. They're from somewhere like West Virginia or something. And it's basically about someone who turns to crystal meth or heroin because they're struggling economically, and watching that person fade away and slowly die from their drug addiction. It's a really sad song, but tells the same story that so many people have seen, so many people have experienced. I mean, pretty much everybody has a story. Like, even the people I know who have struggled with addiction due to getting hooked on prescriptions are like not people who you would expect, right? They're people who are upstanding, active in their church community, active in their, all their communities. They have a job, they have a family. And thankfully, the people I know, because they have that support system, have been able to get out and kick the addiction. But it was just, they had a surgery, right? They had had some sort of medical issue, and they were given opioids, and then they got hooked and started stealing them from friends or whatever and buying them. And eventually it turned into an addiction. It threatened to tear their life apart, but it can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone. You see a homeless person, on the street, someone who looks like they're struggling with drug addiction. You're like, oh, You know, how gross, how disgusting. They're different from me. That's a person on the street. I'm a person who's not, you know, homeless. But that could be you. That could be you if you needed a surgery on your ankle and it was in 2001 and the doctors were pushing opioids on you because that's what they were being told to do by the providers and the pharmaceutical companies above them. And it led to you getting hooked on heroin. It can destroy your life, and it can happen to anyone, right? People think, trust the doctor, right? You can tell your doctor anything. A doctor is a person who you can confide in. You can tell them about your health. Nope. The doctor's going to try and sell you drugs that'll ruin your life. Not always, obviously. And they're good doctors, but that's why it can happen to anyone. Hello, Matthew. Yo, Eddie. UPS Teamster here from Oklahoma. Very cool. Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you for the super chat. And thank you for being a UPS Teamster. That's badass. I just started watching a couple weeks ago and wanted to show support. Awesome. Awesome. Hopefully you can spread Midwestern Marx, or not Midwestern Marx, but socialism and Marxism to the other UPS Teamsters there in Oklahoma. We also hope that we can make the workday a little quicker and a little easier for you. But thank you so much, Matthew. Solidarity. Thanks for the super chat. Thanks for your labor. Thanks for your organizing. That's really cool. I've never talked to a UPS Teamster. Very, very cool. Are you close to Tulsa? Every time I go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which there's a big wrestling tournament that's there most years. When I go there, I'm always shocked. Like it's a nice city, but there's just so much homelessness. There's so much poverty. And then you have like these giant billboards that are like, call this number for loans on bonds, loans on cash bail. So our prison system is set up so you can pay bail, you can pay bond and get out. It's literally just the way they extract money using the prison system. But anyways, and in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, they're offering people loans for bonds. So your friend goes to jail, you can take out a loan that you got to pay back with interest so you can get your friend out of jail. Is the most predatory shit I've ever heard of. It's that bonds bail system that shouldn't even exist, that's designed to suck money out of people who don't have money, combined with predatory loans, which giving people super high interest loans to suck even more money out of them so they can get their friends and family out of jail. But yeah, thank you for the super chat. That's just my story about Oklahoma. It's all of Oklahoma. Homeless problem is huge here as well. I'm in Oklahoma City. Oh, homeless problem is huge here as well. It's all of Oklahoma. Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's been my experience too. Big wrestling state Oklahoma is. Any city with a lot of homelessness is not good. Nothing against the proletariat living there, but the city sucks. Right. It's bad for everyone. Like, it's nothing against the homeless people. It's not callous or targeted at them or saying they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Right? It's like, but it's terrible that those people are living without a home when we have more than enough homes to house everyone. And we know this statistically. And it's just bad forever. Like the bunch of the wrestlers who I went there as a coach, and the wrestlers I was coaching had to go for a run to cut weight, and they were like leaping over homeless people. And it's just sad. It's just a sad state of affairs for everybody. And it's, makes you disconnected from humans. Certain humans are untouchables, it's the kind of culture it creates. It's terrible. It's such a place, such a lack of dignity for those people. And it leads to more isolation, social isolation, and disconnect between people. UPS is the perfect place for militant unionism. Darn right. I almost worked at the city post office. That would have been awesome. Someone tell Anna Kasparian, LOL. Yeah, didn't she support a bill to like get all the homeless people off the street or something? Just like, or like arrest them for being homeless or something? when you get arrested for being homeless in America, you can go to jail for a profit and have to take a loan, or you can go to a for-profit jail and have to take a loan out on the bail bond system. Freedom. Facts. Facts. If only the gulags in the Soviet Union would have been privatized, and if they would have accepted bribes, you know, if they would have said, if you can pay us $500,000, we'll let your family member go. Or you can take out a giant loan and pay back the interest on it for the rest of your life. Then we'll let your family go and not make them do prison labor. If the gulags worked like that, it would have been okay. Right? The Soviet gulags were bad, but the American prison system's freaking awesome. Freaking crazy. I want to watch this Anna Kasparian video.
The Young Turks' Anna Kasparian took heat online after posting a video of a man assaulting a woman, saying, quote, "This is a man who was arrested 41 times. After this incident, he was released and went on to send a subway worker to the hospital with a broken collarbone. But according to this crime reporter, that man committing assault breaking bones is the real victim." Here's the video. It's pretty graphic. And so then Anna Kasparian was getting...
Ugh, that was a terrible video to watch.
A lot of criticism online from the left on Twitter, other places, for, you know, calling her kind of like a right-wing person for daring to be concerned on behalf of the person who got sucker punched, and, you know, anyone else experiencing violence on the streets, which I think is pretty ridiculous, is indicative of some messed up priorities here. Look, you know, we can have a reasonable debate over what are the right political policy strategies for reducing violence on the streets, reducing homelessness, reducing drug addiction. But I don't. What is wrong about being outraged that is something a random New Yorker has to experience? That obviously that's horrible. That's wrong. That's horrifying. And I am just as sickened about it as Anna Kasparian is. But I'm not a progressive in good standing with progressives. So I guess I'm not betraying any team to say it sickens me. But I guess for Anna, for progressive people, it's different. But you probably, you know, Batya, as someone who has been on, I know you're a very independent thinker, but you've been associated with those circles and that ideology, and you've been very, very critical of it. And I know you're concerned about rising crime. So you've probably gotten a lot of the kinds of criticism Anna Kasparian's getting now.
The thing is, she was getting it from both sides, you know, the progressives who, you know, prioritize criminals and mentally ill homeless people and drug addicts over their victims. But she was also getting it from the right, who were saying, well, you're a progressive. Your website is full of articles talking about defunding the police and police accountability, and this is where this leads. And I so identify with where she's coming from as somebody who myself went through that journey of first pushing for things like bail reform and then realizing the costs of them, and that maybe these, you know, there were a lot of mistakes made.
What did Anna Kasparian actually tweet?
Due to some.
What did she actually say? I think I missed that part. I don't know. Seems like a whole story about people being outraged on Twitter, but let's see. I don't know. Anna Kasparian's annoying. Anna said something has to be done about the homeless. Oh. Holy F, I hate these two. Yeah, the rising people are terrible, dude. They're terrible. Got zero patience left for this shit. None. This is so dramatic. I don't know. She said, I used to be for bail reform. Oh, really? I gotta find the tweet. I still didn't find it. Violent criminal was charged with kidnapping and beat his partner, was released for... So she was just doing propaganda coverage. Oh, here it is. This is the man who was arrested 41 times after this incident. He was released and went on a subway worker to the hospital with a broken collarbone. But according to this crime reporter, the man committing assault / breaking bones is the real victim. Oh, I see. I see. Because she's doing what a right winger would do, taking a one-off incident and using it to, say that, see, we're not tough enough on criminals, right? This guy was arrested 41 times. He should have been arrested 42 times and put in the slammer, when in reality, this guy, should have had therapy, should have had rehabilitation targeted at him, should have had his needs taken care of from when he was a young child, right? It's generally trauma that leads people to end up like this that's never addressed and isn't addressed by our society, because everybody's so busy just worrying about themselves, individualism, trying to get by. And, therapy and proper help for your trauma is so expensive for most people. The system just kicks them to the curb or throws them in jail 42 times before they finally do something bad enough to get locked in there. Right? And the answer isn't to do something about them, like get rid of them, get longer prison sentences or whatever. The answer is to treat people's traumas and meet people's basic needs. So I see why people were upset about that. But it also seems like a lot of outrage. So obviously that video was really bad. It was a bill backed by a big funder of TYT that she was shilling for. Of course. Yeah. TYT is terrible. And they're a real network, right? People wonder why they have why they're taking corporate sponsorships now. They employ a lot of people. When you hear Hassan Piker talk about his time at TYT, he's like, I was so scared to leave TYT because I didn't know how much money I was going to make from Twitch. And it's like, you had 2 million followers on Twitch or whatever, not 2 million, but he had so many people following him on Twitch, way more than TYT, way more than what the Young Turks gets. But when the Young Turks were getting competitive, they were telling Hassan, you can't stream all day if you want to be part of our network. And that's when he left. But their money, isn't really coming from views, isn't coming from their audience the same way an independent streamer's views would. Their views are coming from their financiers, from their donors, from capitalists, bankers, and finance capitalists who want to control the minds of young Americans who watch TYT. All 12 of them. Savvy Sabs tweet. Anna Kasparian asks if anyone takes Aaron Mate seriously. Wow. Did she really? I freaking love Savvy Sabs and RBN. And this is where TYT gets really bad. When they talk about Jimmy Dore and the gray zone, I just want to jump out my window right here. It's only a first story window, so I'd be fine, but still, I just want to jump out and start running. The conspiracy theorists, Putin apologists, regime defenders, Assad defenders. It's no, they're just real journalists. The gray zone guys are just real journalists. You are not. You are corporate funded, so they go against your narratives, and then you try and call them conspiracy theorists, and it's disgusting because you're pretending to be what they actually are, a journalist.
Russia apologists like Aaron Mate, Tim Pool, people like that, felt like this was a big gotcha. Did you see what she just did?
Holy cow, I called it before I even started the video. I am a political genius, the greatest mind of the 21st century. I knew that the Young Turks weren't going to make a real argument and they were just going to call actual journalists Russian apologists or Assad apologists. Ooh, it's almost like they do the same thing every time instead of ever making a real argument.
It gets worse, by the way. She just called him a Russian apologist. People who are pretending that Ukraine are the good guys, I want to remind everybody, the United States government is funding and helping Nazis in Ukraine. And you have all these talking heads around here pretending like that's not an issue. They sound just like MSNBC and CNN.
I mean, does anyone take this guy seriously?
Well, not anymore.
How can you guys, like, all you can do is laugh at this guy at this point.
Did she just say, does anyone take this guy seriously?
Seymour Hersh, one of the most famed Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalists of the last 70 years, was on the Gray Zone the other day talking to Aaron Mate. Pretty much every actual journalist in the profession respects Aaron Mate, especially for his work on Syria. But the Young Turks and the corporate media outlets have no respect for him. I mean, we were talking about this the other day in journalism, in the field of journalism. It is a little weird in the U.S. in a capitalist country because the people who rise to the top, the people who become the most famous, if they're not like Seymour Hersh and they just publish, groundbreaking investigative work all the time, are people who are just willing to suck off the establishment, people who are willing to just give this mainstream narrative and so they can go on CNN every night, folks like Wolf Blitzer. But those aren't their most respected journalists, right? Nobody respects Wolf Blitzer and Don Lemon and those folks, Sean Hannity. Everyone knows they're political hacks. They're just the most famous because they're the most corporate funded. But the most respected journalists are folks like Seymour Hersh, folks who have stayed true to their principles and told the truth, even when it's not convenient, and even when they know that they'll be attacked and smeared by ghouls like Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uyghur. But to say that nobody takes them seriously is hilarious. Like when you compare the journalistic credentials of Aaron Mate versus Anna Kasparian. But also, this is all the corporate media hacks can do, right? This is all the fake journalists who hate Aaron Mate for doing real journalism. This is all they can do is smear them and try and destroy their reputation, right? She can't engage with Aaron Mate on the substance. She can't debunk his argument. She can't do her own journalism that's better than his. So she just goes, well, nobody even takes this guy serious. He's just a Putin supporter. Nobody even takes him serious. The corporation who gave TYT $20 billion to say this bullshit doesn't even take Aaron Mate serious. Who even listens to that guy? It's like middle school bully type stuff. It's a middle school bully who's insecure because he's not smart like the smart kids. Who's like, who even likes that guy? Who even likes him? He probably hangs out with Putin. That's the level of intellect you get at TYT, a middle school bully.
You know who people don't take seriously anymore, Anna? You and TYT. I can't believe people still watch TYT. You are the ones that people don't take seriously anymore. And it's really interesting because if you look on YouTube, you'll see videos just from like 2-3 years ago where they've interviewed Aaron Mate. Did you not consider him to be serious back then? Or is it because he's out there telling the truth?
Because, that's how award-winning journalists conduct business. That's how they do their jobs. What a freaking clown.
Okay, guys, Caleb is here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. It's always funny to me, too, because Anna always brings up the fact that he's an award-winning journalist. I'm going to go ahead and
award-winning journalist.
He's out there telling the truth.
Because, that's how award-winning journalists conduct business. That's how they do their jobs. What a freaking clown.
Okay, guys, Caleb is here, so I'm going to go ahead.
She's so dramatic, too. She's so dramatic. What a freaking clown. I'm so pissed about Aaron Mate right now. I'm so upset. How dare he actually tell a story that's true and expose my company as a bunch of liars on behalf of the imperialist ruling class. I bet you he's funded by Putin. It's all projection, too. I know we're funded by corporations, so he's got to be funded by Putin. Or maybe he's just not a sellout, Anna. Maybe you should just calm down.
And bring him in. It's always funny to me, too, because Anna always brings up the fact that he's an award-winning journalist. It's almost like there's some type of jealousy there. Let's bring Caleb in.
Hi.
Hey, Caleb. Perfect timing. I know you've seen a lot of things on Twitter as well. There's been a lot of people going around calling people Russian apologists, saying that they're secret Russian assets. I just heard the other day that RT was taken down in some countries. So I want to get your take on this.
My personal Twitter account that belongs to me personally, does not belong to my employers at RT, has been labeled Russian state-affiliated media. And that's BS. My employers at RT do not tell me what to tweet. Nobody in Russia tells me what to tweet. I decide what I put on my personal Twitter account. And the fact that Twitter labeled it that way shows you what they're doing. They don't want you to listen to what certain people have to say. Just watching that clip that you just showed me, how much fake news is coming out from mainstream media? So many videos that have been debunked.
And this is before we knew about the Hamilton 68 dashboard, before we knew about the think tank headed up by John Podesta and some figures associated with the Obama-Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, and along with Bill Kristol. They were trying to get Twitter to remove like 30,000 accounts, and TikTok did remove 30,000 accounts for being Russian bots, including ours, which, similar to Caleb Maupin's, was not a Russian bot. Obviously, it was just me making videos that NATO and the State Department didn't like because they were getting popular and exposing their BS. So TikTok removed 30,000. Twitter was being pressured to by this think tank. They didn't, because they said it's obvious that you're lying to us. It's obvious that you just want us to delete real people's accounts while claiming that they're Russian bots because you disagree with their political opinions. So Twitter ended up shutting the whole thing down. Apparently, they have more integrity than TikTok and the company that manages TikTok's American data called Oracle. But this was Twitter was already censoring people, and the mainstream media was already attacking people for being Russian bots and Russian disinformation artists before they were even explicitly banning people for it. So, I mean, the TikTok thing's just crazy. They'll never face any kind of... They'll never have to pay for just literally deleting our account and calling us Russian bots when we're not Russian bots. And then anytime our accounts get to a certain level of popularity, they just delete them. It's freaking insane. And the company I found that is managing TikTok's data, Oracle, they've been connected to the State Department forever. So... if RBN had some sort of set that mimicked mainstream media, I wonder if more people would see them as legit. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. There's only so much I can do, but we're always trying to increase our presentation value. You know, try and make things look more like mainstream media, look more like outlets that have money behind them. It's hard though. It's hard to get your production value up. Nobody talks about Ukrainian bots, right? When we know that there are. When, you know, for SOS Cuba, for Syrian regime change efforts, for every single, and for the Nicaraguan elections recently, for all of these major political events, the U.S. State Department or various NGOs were caught making bots. They were caught creating social media bot accounts to influence the narrative on social media. And if you look at our TikTok comments under our videos about Ukraine, you'll be able to see comments that are obvious bots. And however, you never ever hear about Ukrainian bots. You only hear about these mystical, magical Russian bots that supposedly exist. Someone did a study the other day of the percentage of bots. Hold on. There was actually a study that was done on it, and they found that, yeah, here it is. How crazy is this? 60 to 80% of Twitter accounts posting about Russia, Ukraine are war bots. So 60 to 80% of the accounts posting about it are bots. 90% of them are pro-Ukrainian. Oh no, the Russian bots. Russia's infiltrating our democracy. Our sacred democracy has been taken over by Putin's bots. that are 90% Ukrainian. Oh, we live in a freaking clown world. I need to make a TikTok about that later. NAFO trolls are so annoying. They are so annoying. It's obvious to tell you can tell they're bots too. It's so obvious. It'll just be some like stock profile picture and they all say the same things. They all repeat the same lines. Everybody's a Russia apologist. Everyone's in the pocket of Putin. Like, okay, guys. Okay, sounds good. I'm going to go be like, in my next life, I'm going to be like Seabass, the guy who doxed me on TikTok. I'm just going to make videos in favor of NATO. And then I'll have like 100 bots that always like my videos. And then that'll be enough for me. I'll be satisfied with that TikTok audience. That's how Seabass is. The 100 bots that follow his account, he's very proud of. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited to do a TikTok about that video. All right, y'all. I'm probably going to call it a day here. We're not going to go 5 hours like we did the other day, but I did make it 3 hours. Thank you so much to all the super chatters. Thank you so much to all our YouTube members and Patreon supporters. I'm trying to see if any of our YouTube members asked a question here that I can answer before we end. What about the late Iranian boys? I don't know what that means, but thank you for being a YouTube member, Sam Dixon. Much love. Eddie, you always whistle that tune from that one commercial. Do I? I probably do. That's just me being indoctrinated with capitalist propaganda. I got a Seabass video on my For You page the other day, and I started commenting, and he was deleting my comments to make himself look like he was winning. Yes, he always does that for sure. End with a song reaction is about labor. Yes, send it to me, Sam. Let's do it. Let's do it before we end the stream. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Really appreciate that. And I appreciate you being a YouTube member. For those who don't know, now you can be a YouTube member. $10 members or greater get a copy of the Journal of American Socialist Studies ebook, which you can find in our community tab on the link. Same thing that $10 Patreon members get. And you also get emotes and comment priority. So if you leave a comment and someone else leaves a comment, I am more likely to answer your comment. So yeah, thanks. Just got to get this song. Hopefully this doesn't get us taken down. You can skip the first 2 minutes if you don't want the story beforehand. For sure. What's it called though? The commercial. I heard it on one of the Kill Bill movies. Tall buildings. All right, let's run it. Rest in peace to our account after it gets taken down for copyright, but this will be worth it. Just kidding. I'm sure we'll be all right.
The reason I play this song is because of a little boy that I saw wearing a suit. was on one of the first tours I was ever invited on. I was opening shows for Patty Griffin. We were in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, doing a show, and this was all brand new stuff to me. Shows like this. We were staying in a really nice hotel. The hotel was so nice, there was a wedding taking place downstairs. I'm walking down there, I'm going across the street to the gig, and I see a little boy wearing a suit. You know, he's there for the wedding. And I overheard his father tell him, "Son, you better get used to that suit. Because one day when you grow up, you're gonna have to put one on every morning when you go to work." I thought, well, that's cute. Little boy all dressed for success. But soon I realized it was in fact not cute, and what an asshole this guy must be. And it reminded me of this old folk song that a good friend of mine used to play night after night when we had this little gig playing a little bar years ago in Taos, New Mexico. That night I'd never played that song before, but that night I wrote down the words to it and I played it, and I've been playing it ever since. It's an old folk song by John Hartford. Someday, my baby, when I am a man, and others have taught me the best that they can, they'll sell me a suit and cut all my hair and send me to work in tall buildings. So it's goodbye to the sunshine, goodbye to the dew, goodbye to the flowers, and goodbye to you. I'm off to the subway, I must not be late. I'm going to work in tall buildings. So when I retire, my life is my own. I've paid all of my debts, and it's time to come home and wonder what happened betwixt and between when I went to work in tall buildings. So it's goodbye to the sunshine, goodbye to the dew, goodbye to the flowers, and goodbye to you. I'm off to the subway, I must not be late. I'm going to work in tall buildings. So it's goodbye to the sunshine, goodbye to the dew, goodbye to the flowers, and goodbye to you. I'm off to the subway, I must not be late. I'm going to work in tall buildings. Yeah, I'm going to work in tall buildings. I'm going to work in tall building.
Dang, what a good song. I got to learn to play that on guitar. What a perfect way to end the stream, too. Thank you for that, Sam. Really appreciate it. It reminds me of what I was saying earlier about my friend who said that office buildings with a bunch of cubicles are like human farms. We're just sucking the energy and life out of every human in there, in the tall buildings. So that's awesome. I really, really love that. All right. Solidarity, everyone. We'll see you next time.